Very good afternoon to you. I'll tell you how ironic. I've just received a text message from my wife, right? And Russell Quirk's with me, and it says, Oliver and Iris are listening in the car, and I've just said to her, darling, the first story is so awful, turn the radio off, and she's just done OK. Listen, I try and do this job to the best of my ability. Some people like what I do, some people don't. I try and be as high octane and as enthusiastic. When I hear stories about the father of Sarah Sharif, who this afternoon has been found guilty of murdering the 10-year-old. This is in Woking, you might have heard this. He enticed his wife, Batul as well, Banish Batul. She's been also found guilty of murder. Their faces are on my screen. I wish you'd take them off. The brother-in-law as well has been found guilty of aiding and abetting. I don't want to put a dampener on your afternoon, but I want people to understand what's wrong with this goddamn country. First up, this piece of... oh, man. Exploited EU rules to stay in the United Kingdom, OK? He decided to marry a Polish woman in a sham marriage so that he could stay in our country. He ended up at a £500,000 house in Woking. He didn't work. For all the people who think that this country should be a haven to anybody and everybody, listen to this story. When they discovered this child, 70 injuries, 25 fractures. Neighbours reported that over a 2-year period, because of howling, this is so awful, right? Social services were called as gut-wrenching screams came from a house for 2 years and they ignored it. In fact, social services in Surrey, great job, decided there wasn't anything to look into. This girl was forced to wear a habib to school because of the bruises on her body, but astonishingly, as I said, a decision was made not to look into it. Months later, she was brutally killed. Russ, we're both fathers. I don't care if I get sacked for what I'm going to say. We are going to pay for that piece of filth. I can't have it. Where I come from, that's not right, man. Talk to me.
Yeah, look, this is beyond harrowing, disgusting, isn't it? And honestly, where to start with this disgusting story? Got
to do it. It's on every single. It's important.
No, we have, and look, and hopefully for the hapless senior police officers, for the hapless social services leaders that might listen to this, and this might actually make them act and react differently in the future to save a Sarah Sharif in the future. Let's hope that actually can be some kind of benefit for talking about this absolutely outrageous and harrowing story. So, yeah, little Sarah Sharif, 10 years old, is subject to abuse, not just abuse, torture, let's be honest, torture, by this vile, disgusting monster.
Let me read you something. And for
Sharif.
A woman...
And Banish Batul, let's say their names.
Yeah.
Irfan Sharif, Banish Batul. And there's the fact that this was undertaken on this poor, innocent 10-year-old girl who was described, by the way, as a cheerful little soul, despite the fact that she was subject to this abuse for months and years. But this guy, Irfan Sharif, he should never have been in a position to be able to undertake this abuse. He shouldn't have been in the country in the first place. It was a sham marriage that he orchestrated on the basis of being able to stay so that he could avoid deportation. We've talked on this channel many, many times about people that avoid deportation. This is a very, very real example of someone that avoided deportation and then went off not only to commit crimes, but actually the most disgusting and disgraceful and harrowing crime.
Let me read you some WhatsApp messages from that woman who's been convicted today of murder, Banish Patel, to her sister. Irfan is going crazy again, beating Sarah up. I'm having a panic attack. I think he's literally breaking her arm or her leg. He's locked us out. I'm literally dying. He won't open the door. I don't get... with the phone the police love...
she's complicit. I know she's not been sentenced.
Completely complicit. I mean, you're right. Exploiting EU rules. All those do-gooders, right? All those do-gooders, all those people who go, oh, these people from war-torn countries and the EU with their ridiculous common sense. This piece of crap wouldn't have been in this country. Maybe he'd have done it somewhere else. He doesn't deserve to be on the earth. I don't care what anybody says.
So to be clear, so Sharif and Batul have been found guilty today, the pair of them. The uncle has been found not guilty of murder, but guilty of causing or allowing, this is pretty much as bad as far as allowing the death of a child. They'll be sentenced next week, of course. I really hope that that sentence is, I mean, look, the most definitive and harshest sentence there can be.
Can I have an argument with you about that?
Well, look,
they'll get full... Right, this is what they'll get, and they'll get half the sentence out. And I'm going to have the debate whether the bosses here like it or not. Are you telling me... I'd love to know what you think, right? And Ryan's looking at me in that way, right? Does this person deserve to remain on this earth? Well, I don't care if that upsets people. 0344 499 1000.
I'm actually not a fan of corporal punishment, capital punishment, but there should be absolutely unequivocally no way that either Irfan Sharif or Bunish Batul, or indeed Faisal Malik, the uncle, get out of prison.
But they will, Russell, they will.
Well, let's see what happens on Tuesday, because there'll be a sentence, and I'm sure it will be life. Let's hope it is life. We'll see. But then, of course, given the outrageously ridiculous and bendy sentencing guidelines, of course, that we have from government down to the judiciary, we may end up in a situation where these vile monsters are actually eligible for parole in 10 years, 15, 20 years' time.
And I'm going to go right for the new Justice Secretary, because as I heard in the news, and I can't back this up, what's that, Shabir Mahmood? She's just come out and said something about prisons. I'd be coming out and talking about this.
Yeah.
Listen to this from Don in Chelmsford. Hi, guys. When I worked in a local authority housing department, we used to report potential child abuse cases all the time by phone to social services and always followed it up with a letter. They would always challenge our expertise and were generally hopeless and not interested.
Yeah. And look, it says here very, very clearly in the reporting here that this man, if we can call him a man, I don't really want to call him a man, I don't want to associate myself, actually, with being a part of the same species, frankly, but that the alarm had been raised about him multiple times. He had a history of violence against multiple women and children. And, yeah, look, neighbours, the wife, goodness knows what else, particularly at social services. I think, look, we can't gloss over this, that social services are there, as is the state, for the protection of 10-year-olds like Sarah. And the fact that this was brought to their attention, screams from the house, people reporting how it was obvious that this child was being abused over a protracted period of time.
Concerned teachers recorded seeing bruises on Sarah and made a report to social services. Neighbours would hear those gut-wrenching screams, all sorts of people, and nothing was done. And you know what will happen is, I've done this before, right, and I've spoken to social services, and they'll go, do you know what, people like you always criticise us, but we do a lot of good work.
No, sure
in life, in work and in life, there are moments where there is no possible way for you not to go, oh my God, how do we fail this kid?
But I'm afraid when it comes to social services, this is not the first time that a radio/TV station has discussed the failings of the British social services. The fact that, you know, there have been children that have been subject to abuse for a protracted period of time, leading often to death, because the social services organisations, the individuals within them, whether it be the rank and file that missed this stuff, whether it be senior leaders that glossed over it for whatever reason, we have seen on very, very many occasions this outcome, this kind of situation prevailing because social services drop the ball. They were called to the house several times. They could see the bruises. They had, presumably, witness statements from neighbours saying that they could hear screams.
What do you make of what I said?
They also know the history of this vile individual, and yet still they didn't take her away. They didn't involve the police in any serious way, by the sounds of it. And the result is not just, and it's horrible to even contemplate the death of Sarah Sharif, but what she went through up to that. I
can't, and social services will remove a child because apparently the father bathed an 8-year-old and you know, like, took his daughter for a bath. There is no punishment, says Andy from Manchester, that exists which can justify what a barbaric and evil abuse against this beautiful little girl had to go through. Honestly, Jez, I'm with you. I feel sick even thinking about this. Andrew in Thatcham, thank you, guys. We've got to talk about it. Jez, I'm literally welling up listening to this story. This girl, I'm so angry with the state of our council departments that are there solely to ensure this doesn't happen again. Why does it keep happening? We're going to go straight to the phone lines, if you're all right with that. Going to Sunderland. Michael, you're on Talk Drive with Russell, Quirk and I. What do you want to say, pal?
First of all, what a distressing, other than subject we're talking about, but I've got history of social services with my grandson and the lies and the deceit that they do. But until people start being made accountable for their actions, nothing's going to get done. I don't see anybody going to prison, losing the job, or being disciplined when any children in the last 5 years that I've heard about since my grandson's been on this earth and I've took an interest in it, anything has happened to anybody in any social services up and down the country.
It's so true, and Ian Collins made a really salient point. Victoria Columbia, you think about Baby P and all that, and it's just, Listen, Michael, there's many things that bond us as a nation and there's many things that bond us as people, but parents, I don't know. Obviously, this is an evil piece of filth who doesn't deserve to be on this planet. What, is prison good enough for him? Then tell me, am I outrageous to have this conversation? I mean, Russell, you said to me, is 50 years in prison better than...
I don't think your reaction is out of line at all. I mean, there'll be lots of people listening to this thinking, look, yeah, this idiot, this person, this monster, this disgusting individual does not deserve to be on the planet.
Where do you stand on that, Mikey?
No, I agree. I tell you what I would like to do, right, because I'm like old school, right, and we all know there's certain women who can handle themselves, right? I'll put them in a cell with half a dozen women with old pit boots on, steel-capped toes, and kick them till exactly what he did to that poor girl, his daughter. How can anybody do that to anybody, but never mind the own flesh and blood? That's what I would do. I'd chuck them in a cell, shut it for half an hour and come back and see whatever's left of them.
Mikey in Sunderland, thank you. You understand people's frustration,
I was going to say, you can't be surprised at the reaction from Mikey there. That will be now replicated across tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the country saying, A, this should never have happened, there's been lots and lots of failings, and so on. But
people will say, oh, no, this is what will do my head in. They won't talk about how EU laws allowed that piece of rubbish to stay in my country. They won't talk about how social services have more than dropped the ball. They've caused a child to be killed. They won't, as you quite rightly say, face prosecution like they should do. What will happen is somebody will come out with, you know, the stresses of the job and I've gone off. Let's take this one. This is a voice note. Jonathan on social services, go.
In the airline industry, when there's a plane crash, investigators go in. They investigate everything, and then they're allowed to put protocols in place to make sure that isn't repeated again. This is what we need to have in this country. We need to have open investigations where someone goes in and makes sure and makes protocols that these local authorities and these police forces cannot allow this sort of thing to happen again. It's just, I mean, you know, what year are we in? Are we in the 1600s?
It's very interesting, by the way. You know, when we've criticised the police, the Met Police, and the misogyny, and we talked about Wayne Couzens and those terrible things, we used to use that phrase, marking their own homework. He makes a really good point there. An outside body needs to look into social services as an entity across the UK and change their practices, surely.
And of course, with all these things, there's a government department and therefore a minister that is in charge of this stuff. Now, OK, Labour government have only been in place for 5 months, but I would like to hear in the next 24 hours something from this government that is robust and genuine and authentic around this type of situation. And
they'll just release a few more prisoners, Russ. You won't hear anything about this.
And something put in place to reassure us that this stuff can't happen again. The other thing I worry about, we talk about the over-liberalisation almost of things like the judiciary and the civil service and so on. Are we seeing a situation here with the social service, and I'm asking a question here, I'm not making a statement, I'm asking a question. Are we seeing a situation here where social services is also infiltrated by the woke left on the basis that they just give the benefit of the doubt? Well, guess what happens when you give the benefit of the doubt? People like Sarah die.
Well, here, listen to this, Ash from Bedford, you're spot on the money. It's simple to me. Social services didn't act due to our woke society through fear of being accused of racism due to investigating a family from an ethnic minority. Now, I said this to Ian Collins, and even he looked a bit shocked. We've talked about two-tier policing. Are we in the weeks and months ahead going to learn that there's two-tier looking into social work? That is, Ash in Bedford, that, you know, people go, oh, that's extreme. It's not bloody extreme at all.
Well, it's not extreme to ask the question. And the problem is when we talk about, let's say, is there a higher propensity for people that come here illegally from other countries to commit crime? Again, I'm asking the question. If that is true, we should ask the question, we should look into it by way of data and research and find out if it's true and then do something about it. The problem is with the left and the woke is that the minute people like you, Jeremy Kyle, and I, Russell Quirk, start to say, actually, I wonder if there is a deeper problem here that is one of two-tier nature, is one of an over-woke liberalisation of these organisations, because if so, that needs to be stamped out so that things are dealt with in a balanced and equitable and fair and proper way. I'll give you the perfect example.
We've got the amazing Maggie Oliver on the show later. I have said until, and I don't care what happens to me, that the Rotherham grooming gangs, which were carried out by British Pakistani men, it took 8 years, and in that time, 6 and 7 and 8-year-old kids got raped, and nobody, the police have admitted it would have been difficult and it might have caused tension. I don't care what colour your skin is, I don't care where you come from. If you break the law, and certainly it annoys me so much because I'm I am obsessed with my children. They are my life. They are the only thing, frankly, that I get up in the morning for, right? And you are telling me that a man got into my country, whether he's in my country or not, and he can do that to a 10-year-old and he's going to walk around free. You're telling me that police officers didn't want to investigate paedophiles because they were British Pakistani men? That is ludicrous and wrong.
But we know that's true. And,
yeah.
and therefore, where else does that extend to in our society? The other thing, just to note, as a bit of an aside, this disgusting creature, Irfan Sharif and Banish Batul, of course, pleaded not guilty.
Of course they
So
did.
tried to get off the hook, thought they would have a go at getting away with it. Think of the trauma for the rest of the family, those that actually did love little Sarah.
Yeah.
Think about the cost of these animals taking this whole process through a protracted court system.
8 days at the Old Bailey.
Well, let's see what happens on Tuesday, Jez, in terms of the sentence. But let's just say that regardless
This will
of
capture,
sentence...
this is what I love about this station, this will capture, it's on every newsstand.
Well, you'll be
this
talking
will
about it
capture
Tuesday.
the British public's imagination,
Yeah,
because
and
they
I'd
will
like,
not allow this
and I'd
to go
like to
away.
be back Tuesday, frankly, to talk about it with you. But aside from that, I know it's a bit of an old cliched saying, but there will be a special place in hell, I hope, with fires burning brightly and very, very hot indeed for the likes of Irfan Sharif and Banish Batul.
I have a couple of mates who will no doubt tell me, and I'm going to tread very, very carefully with my words here, because Ryan's looking at me as he should do. Karma's a bitch, and if he does go to prison, I can tell you categorically he won't be allowed to come out of his cell.
It won't be an easy ride, will it?
No, and you know, that's not advocating. Listen to this, Jez. My wife is a childminder and always had an excellent review by Ofsted. Carlin Berry, thank you. If anyone rang Ofsted, even anonymously, and said a child was not being minded properly or they had an issue, Ofsted would be round the house within 24 hours and my wife would be immediately suspended pending an investigation. Why is it that social services can be told numerous times of seriously awful child abuse over 2.5 period and they do nothing? Are they worried getting involved because it's a Muslim family? It's not just me that thinks that. That's Carlin Berry. Paula, Cheshire, says it's very simple. Bring back capital punishment. You cannot take the life of an innocent child and get away with it. The Sarah Sharif case is Clive and Solly is yet again sadly an example of the failure of our social services and the reason capital punishment should be put back into law. This man is total scum. How can he be allowed to live in our society? He is a monster.
Yeah,
I know.
Unfortunately, I don't... Look, capital punishment in this instance would make us all feel a little bit better in terms of vengeance. Justice being seen to be done.
I don't have that. I can't have that argument. It's not about vengeance. It's about if you behave in a certain way, do you deserve to then be living your liberty?
And I get the retribution element, but I don't think it would deter people like Irfan Sharif from behaving in this way.
What does?
Well, him not being here in the first place.
All right, but he'd do it somewhere else.
Deported. Well, yes.
Evil people that cannot...
Does that make us feel better? Probably not.
No,
because
evil people
kids are kids wherever they are.
Evil people like Gary Glitter, Rolf Harris, this
Savile,
piece of
whatever,
crap. You know, these people are chemically... There's no excuse. It's not anxiety or mental illness. They're just wrong-uns. They're evil. I don't think they deserve to be in the fabric of our society. That's just how I feel. I mean, we had the whole thing about Glitter being allowed out after 8 years, for God's sake.
Look, I hope I'm wrong, but on Tuesday, you and I may be having the debate as to why the sentence wasn't harsh enough.
Ian, I've got a voice note. Sarah Sharif, go.
I think we need the death penalty. We need the death penalty, a death for a death. And also something like this child abuse. I mean, we don't need to keep these vermin in our prison. Why should we bother to pay to keep them alive? And not only that, when they come out after serving a fifth or a quarter of their sentence, whatever it'll be, we must probably have to pay for them to have new names. And guess what? They'll get a council house, drawing benefits, no doubt, and being a further drain on the taxpayer.
And you see, if you'd played that call from Ian 5 years ago on a radio station, and I know this, there would have been all hell to pay. He, right, I'm not making a debate about capital punishment. People will have their views, and mine's not about vengeance. It's about you, I believe, you lose your liberty to live amongst your fellow human beings if you take a life, certainly a child. So there is definitive proof, and there is proof in this case. I don't think that's right. But people like Ian, they're everywhere, mate. That's what people feel. Not just about capital punishment, about the frustration.
Yeah, over the next few hours of your show and Kevin's afterwards, we will receive here hundreds of texts, tweets and calls saying pretty much the same thing. And look, I get it. I really, really do.
Do me a favour. Can you stay a bit?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
All right, we're coming right back. 4:22. This is Drive.
On DAB+, on YouTube, on the app, on your mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
4:25, Wednesday afternoon. This appalling story is dominating the news channels around the world. 10-year-old Sarah Sharif, you might have heard the story, murdered, and today her father, Irfan Sharif, and stepmother Vanish Batul, convicted of killing the 8-year-old after an 8-week trial, actually, not 8 days. It transpires, my friends, that this poor child, when discovered, had 70 injuries, including 25 fractures, and for 2.5 years, to say the abuse was absolutely appalling. The police were called, did nothing. Neighbours, gut-wrenching screams, beatings that the social services contacted, did nothing. Turns out this piece of crap, Mr. Sharif, was only here because he'd flouted, with the help of a human rights lawyer, EU laws, or he used them, and had married a Polish woman in a sham marriage to stay in this country. He took benefits and lived in a £500,000 house in Woking, and he beat the living daylights out of this child. He was known as an abuser of vulnerable women and children. It was laid bare, and nobody did anything. These people tried to escape the country. They were arrested on a plane. And I repeat, I have no harm in saying this. I'm always been for my kids and for children. This turns my stomach. The only thing that makes me feel better is, I can't look at that. Look how sweet she is. That's just ridiculous. As Russell Quote pointed out very accurately during this ad break, whilst I'm sitting here saying capital punishment should be brought back, I'm sure there's justice elsewhere that will reach this man. That's all you can say, right?
Fingers crossed. Yes, without advocating that, of course. But look, the reaction to this by any right-thinking individual with a heart will be the same across Britain. You know, everybody will be saying the same. But
how
also,
do we miss that, though? How do we as a society miss that?
But also, I say again, how did this happen? Not only did this slip through the fingers of an inept social services, but this man shouldn't have been here in the first place. Nope. He was known to have a history of violence, beating up and being violent towards vulnerable women, managed to pull a swerve, if you like, to stay in the country. And this, of course, I'm afraid, look, how many other situations like this are ongoing right now that we don't even know about yet? Because of the lackadaisical, perhaps biased nature of some organisations in Britain, whether it's the police or the social services, that are allowing this sort of thing to happen, either because those organisations are lazy, or because they are inefficient, or because, as you rightly point out, as a big question mark, is there a two-tier element going on here as well?
Which is, and I'm quite happy to throw that question out to people. Are we looking at the same as we talked about with policing? And I gave the example before the break. It took 8 years to bring those British Pakistani child rapists in the Manchester Groomings, the Rotherham Groomings, I should say, excuse me, to justice. Maggie Oliver, who was behind, resigned from the police over that, a wonderful advocate of the truth. She's on the show later. The police admitting eventually in Rotherham that they were too scared to start this process for fear of reaction. This is exactly the same. And if that turns out to be the truth, again, great job, guys. Let's just allow a 10-year-old vulnerable child. And they wonder why the British people... The British people would never... I'm not talking about rising up, taking... I'm not talking about that, but they... This is not acceptable, and it can't... Let's go back to the phone lines. So much response. Go to Telford. John, you're through to myself and Russell. What you got?
Hello, Jeremy. How are you, mate?
I'm good.
Yeah, this story's heartbreaking, isn't it, mate?
Terrible.
Yeah. If I say Arthur Labinjo Hughes to you, do you remember the little boy from Birmingham?
Yes.
Murdered by his stepmother and his dad in 2020. It just reminds me so much of this because he was failed by social services. Reports were put in by the family to social services. They visited, said they found nothing wrong.
What do we need to do to make social services more robust in your mind, pal?
It needs reforming. It needs a reform, Jeremy, a total reform.
Where do you stand on two things that we're debating? And it's come from nowhere. Do you believe that this might well turn out to be, although be accused by some people of saying this, an example of two-tier approach in social services to families from different countries and cultures, like the police are doing, obviously?
Most definitely, mate. I mean, we had, I don't know whether you remember, Telford was in the news quite a lot over the grooming.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's funny you should say about Rotherham, like that the police were actually scared to go after these people. It was actually the same in Telford. And a lot of top police officers within the West Mercia Constabulary within Telford area knew about it and were complicit in it.
Also,
and they turned a blind eye to it.
Just quickly, mate, because loads to go, and I'm really grateful for your call. Where do you stand on capital punishment? Russ and I disagree on this. That's good. That's important. Where do you stand on it?
Right. I've always said capital punishment should be brought back, Jeremy. Give me 5 minutes in a cell with this guy, and he won't ever walk out again.
Good man, John. Thank you for calling from Telford. You can understand people's frustration. Got a voice note. Emily on Sarah Sharif. Go.
Hi, Jeremy. Them two that killed that little girl, they should be convicted with a decent prison sentence and sent to a country where it's cheaper to carry out that prison sentence, where, you know, prisons really are hellholes, and they should just be left there.
The problem with that, of course, is that's the reason that we can't deport any of our foreign criminals in our prisons, because the countries say, oh, I didn't commit the crime there. But he wouldn't have committed the crime here if, in fact, we'd not allowed him back in, bending the rules, as you said, right? I've never seen a response. People are just livid, and understandably so. Yeah,
and I don't want to preempt it, because we don't know what the sentences will be on Tuesday, but there will be absolute outrage if these sentences are not life without parole. End of.
4:32. We will talk more about this. I can't make the whole show about it, but Ryan, I've been busy all day, quite right with his call, he and Jodie, on that, and there can't be anybody listening to this show that isn't repulsed by that story. And Russell will be back on Tuesday. He's not going yet. We'll be back on Tuesday, and I hope that they... Sometimes, you know, I understand the judiciary are based entirely on what it says in the book, but I hope whoever is sitting in that chair on Tuesday, a bit like I say to politicians every day, takes a heartbeat from what people are thinking, because I don't want that in my society. Sorry, I don't want that. No.
Well, justice is a complicated thing, right? So it's obviously making sure that you know, someone is punished for what they've done. It's also making sure that others that might go down the same path see what can be done. But also, it's about justice for victims, and I think our society, particularly the higher echelons, our politicians, our police, our judiciary, I'm afraid it seems to me that they forget about the justice that is required and appropriate, morally right, for the memory of victims like Sarah.
Let's move on. No disrespect to her, that poor little girl. We'll talk more about it. If you want to ring and keep ringing and texting about that, please do. 0344 499 1000, text to 87222. I bring you, ladies and gentlemen, to Angela Rayner, Deputy Prime Minister, after her car crash interview with Sir Trevor Phillips on Sky on Sunday, Russ, which was... I mean, firstly, they questioned her about Syria. She didn't even know where Syria was. I'm all for, you know, girl from council estate works her way up, but it was ludicrous. She's now getting heavily involved in house building and new prisons. And according to her, new prisons will be forced through the planning process by Angela Rayner under powers that allow the objections of local towns and villages to be overruled. Under laws introduced to tackle the prison overcrowding crisis, the Ministry of Justice will be able to bypass councils who normally decide on planning applications, even if the proposed buildings were built on green belt land. I think I'm going to shock you with my response to this.
Oh, no, I think I might shock you too. I think she has a point.
I think she has more than a point, and I'm going to do it like this, because you know all those people that go, we need more housing, we need more prisons like me. Sorry, but actually, if somebody's saying, I'm not going to spend my time listening to you bleeding councillors moaning, right, I know the Countryside Alliance, but it's not going to be all Greenbelt. I actually think we're going to do something, genuinely.
We can't have it both ways. We can't say we need more prisons, which undoubtedly we do. We know they're bursting at the seams. And FYI, by the way, 10,400 of the 85,000 prison spaces are taken up by foreign prisoners.
That's 12.5%, peeps. You can send them back tomorrow. Oh, no, we can't, because that's against the ECHR crap.
There's the talk solution right there. You heard it here. We're not first, because we've been talking about this for months and years. That's part of the solution. We can't have it both ways. We can't say we need more prisons and more housing. And then I'm afraid, and I'll say this as an ex-councillor that chaired a planning committee in my hometown of Brompton in Essex, councillors that are on planning committees run very scared very easily. You'll get a gaggle of 10 or 20 people locally that will lobby their local councillor and say, if you don't stop this housing development, stroke prison, whatever it might be, we won't vote for you, you will lose your seat. So forget what they call planning merit, which is, should that thing be built there? Does it meet the template as such? Councillors get in the way on the basis that they are worried politically about their own skin. So that's why, and I can't believe I'm saying this, Deputy Prime Minister, Housing Secretary Angela Rayner, for once, Ange, I agree with you.
I think we both do. This is great. New Labour government, which doesn't get anything right, in our humble opinion. Check this, ladies and gentlemen. They arrived to apparently an £11 billion black hole from the Tories. Those dreadful Tories that left £11 billion and then spent another £11 billion on giving all their friends in the public sector, doctors and all these people, a pay rise. This is great. I told you what was 1979 was like when all the unions went, well, he's had 15%, she's had 20%. I wanted, otherwise. Angry trade union bosses have warned Starmer of fresh NHS and school strikes after ministers recommended a 2.8% pay rise for millions of public sector workers. In its submissions to a series of pay review bodies, the government said its proposed limit for salary increases for 25-26. So there we have it. The view from the cheap seat, Starmer, is to say, I'm going to look after everybody. But you've done the classic thing. You've given a certain amount of people some money to make yourself look good because the doctors' strike will end. And now all the others are going to come out of the woodwork and say, if you don't give us the same, we're going on strike. That is pure. That happens with Labour every time, Russ.
Yeah, and so, as we know, in the first few weeks of this government, train drivers, junior doctors, nurses and so on were given, I mean, it's fair to say, I think, inflation-busting pay increases. Inflation was about 2%. They were given increases of anything up to 22%, albeit over a couple of years. Actually, when you look at this, inflation now is running at about 2 and a bit percent, 2.4%. So getting 2.8% as a pay rise seems about fair.
I want the money back from the other people because inflation's so low.
Well, yeah. So, but they of course, the other side of the argument is that they'll say yes, but we were behind anyway. Well, my argument to that is, why do you think the taxpayer should bring you back to ground zero in terms of you being at parity? I mean, that doesn't happen in the private sector. Of course it does. Someone can't work for me and come along and say, well, inflation's a bit higher this month. Can I have an inflation-busting pay rise?
You mean you wouldn't give them a pay rise?
Well, I'd just ask them to work a little bit harder and produce a bit more, and they can earn a bit more commission.
You're a legend, mate. I don't mean to cut you off because I could do this all day with you. Listen, fantastic. Thank you for involvement. He's going to be back. Book him for Tuesday. I'd love him to be here when that hopefully justice for poor Sarah Sharif comes through. Russell Quirk, thank you so much indeed. 22 minutes to 5. You want to be part of the debate as ever, my friends. 0344 499 1000. Text to 87222. I'm coming back in 3.
This is Talk.
20 minutes to 5 o'clock, live across the UK. Talk Drive is on between now and 7 o'clock. Loads of people lined up. I just want to take a second to change subject. Hundreds of tractors again taking part today. Protests certainly in Westminster. Go Slow tractor protest taking place in Suffolk. The farming community of this country railing against a Labour government for the reasons that you know. I consider it their chance to grab land by making farmers' positions untenable so that they can build their ruddy wind farms, and then they'll import the meat that we eat and the food that we eat that's grown in this country from other countries and charge us a lot more. He's been on the show a couple of times, always delighted to have him on. Matt Cullen's a beef farmer, 4th generation. Last time we saw him, he was in his tractor outside Westminster. How you doing, kidder?
Yeah, not too bad, Jeremy, thank you. Good evening to you all.
Give us an update on where we are. We saw those protests in Westminster. We've heard Farage and Clarkson and loads of people saying this is a direct attack on our farming community. For people who don't understand, we're talking about a government, the Labour Party, who say farmers should pay inheritance tax. So I'll put it in layman's terms for everybody listening. If you own a farm worth £2 million, they want how many percent of that? 20%?
Well, 20%, yep.
So you've got to find £400,000. Then if you have to sell it to do that, you've got to pay capital gains tax. And what you've always said to me, Matt, is these farms, you're custodians of these farms. They're passed down from generation to generation. And the real eye-opener, apart from the fact for me, was when I was told by you that farmers, maybe, even if their farm's worth £3 million, are only taking out between 1 and 2% in salary a year. They're not multi-millionaires. They're scraping, right?
Absolutely right there, Jeremy, and this is the big problem. You know, farmers for a long time now have not been making any money whatsoever, and quite frankly, a lot of farms have been making a loss. And this uproar is because these farms can't afford to pay that sort of amount of tax bill, even over the government's advisory of 10 years. The business that they run could not pay those yearly payments. So that's why farmers are in such uproar at the moment and don't want this tax to go through.
And also, just making it for the... To me, this is so symptomatic of Labour. They'll look at you... I don't know what your farm's are. I'm going to say 2 million. I'm sure it is. But so they're going to look at you and they're going to go, he's got a £2 million farm. He's rich. He's entitled. We're going to make him pay some tax on that so we can feed all the immigrants. Or I'll get told off for that, but you know exactly what I mean. That farm is going to be passed down to your children, to be passed down to you. And the thing that really infuriates me, apart from that... two things. It's blatantly a land grab, so their ridiculous green-gendered wind farm rubbish ideas are going to be implemented, at which point somebody's going to go, oh, we don't grow enough food for the British people, and it'll have to be imported from elsewhere, for God's sake, man.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And you see, we've had a lot of people say, oh, but you've got, you've got this, your machinery's worth this. This is where the money adds up. 100 acres of farmable land today is worth 1 million. So it doesn't take long to get to the value and the figures.
Yeah.
Now, there are lots of people out there that said, oh, well, you're all rich. We're not rich. Yes, I would categorically say we would be if we sold everything and cashed it in. But that's not what we're about, and that's not what we're doing. We're actually asset rich, but cash poor is a business. And so when the threshold is set at 3 million now, and you can offset against a spouse, and then you can hand it down within 7 years, all of those things have to happen in a sequence for it to come right. And the problem was the bar was set far too low at 3 million. You're avoiding all the big bankers and investors that have bought up land to avoid paying inheritance tax. You're not going to touch them, and they've literally bulldozed their way through the family farm. And when you've got machinery totting up to a tractor today would be 150, 200,000, a combine £500,000, it doesn't take very long to get to that figure of 3 million. And you've got farm buildings and you've got a house. It soon very much equates to it. And most average farms today are from 150 acres to 350.
Matt,
that's your average working family farm. Yep.
What will, and I don't mean to be rude, I haven't got all the time in the world today because I've got, but I wanted to say this to you. If this happens, and I will stand absolutely shoulder to shoulder with farmers, I think it's a land grab and I think it's a disgrace, and I think it sums up this Labour Party because they just look through narrow eyes at, oh, privileged people, what a load of old rubbish. Yep. What will this do to the farming community in the United Kingdom if this ridiculous piece of legislation goes through?
If it goes through and it's voted right through the House of Lords as well, it will just literally put a steamroller through the farming community. And what it will do, it won't be 20% that farmers are going to be affected as of the government's figures. It's actually 70% of farmers it's going to affect. And that's 70% of farmers producing food in this country. And at the moment, we produce just over 55% of our own food in this country, which is still not enough. We need to be doing more. But you knock out 70% that are going to be affected, that leaves it into importing and being a big importer. And that's a very dangerous place to be in because you will be held ransom. And that's the trouble we're fighting for. We're here to produce food to feed the nation. We're not here to be bulldozed out the way, land grabs come in, and farmers go. And when they're gone, they're not coming back.
Matt, I could talk to you forever, but I'll tell you this. This station and I and all the people will stand with you farmers forever. We appreciate you being on. Matt Cullen there, a beef farmer, railing quite rightly against that ridiculous plan, that inheritance tax, a tractor tax. They want to screw all the farmers and nick their land. This is Talk Drive. Just to let you know, we're trying to get out and about. If you've got a story that's affected you or your family and you think that we should know about it, investigate it, talk about it, here's an email address. Email tips, T-I-P-S, tips, by the way, not what you thought I said, at talk.tv, tips at talk. We want you to be basically our eyes and ears on the streets of Great Britain. Stuff that's affecting you, real-life issues, stuff that's happening in your communities. Tips at talk.tv. You know what's happening next. I'm going to say the wrong word. 10 to 5. Voice note. That Sarah Sharif case, so appalling. That poor little 10-year-old. Thank God the pieces of scum that were eventually found have been... well, they've been found guilty today. The sentencing will be on Tuesday. The world is watching, and I have to say, so many of you angry. Voice note. Mark, you're on.
What really annoys me is the fact that when this happens time and time again, the people responsible do not lose their jobs or are not prosecuted if possible. It's about time that we started making these people accountable. That's police, social services, anybody that has a responsibility to protect our children and families. I'm sick of it. It happens all the time. We need accountability.
Couldn't agree more. Let's go to Professor Ray Jones, a former Director of Social Services in Wiltshire. Ray, good afternoon. Thank you for joining Talk Drive. How are you?
OK.
Let's start with what that man said that millions of people today will be saying across the country. We heard today that people are about to be prosecuted for the heinous crimes against the post office. All those poor people who went through years of hell. Finally, we might find that police officers and members of the, I don't know, House of Commons, politicians, whatever, could be prosecuted. That man's just said it. How many more Victoria Columbiers? How many more Sarah Sharifs? How many more Baby Ps before... not ex-colleagues of yours, but people in social services and people who... I mean, there's nobody that can defend the fact that this was... I mean, astonishingly, social services didn't look into this family man. They need to be prosecuted, these people, don't they?
Well, if you take that line, I think most of us will be off the pitch. I was a social services director for... I said, if you take that line of wanting to sack everybody when something awful happens, most of us will be off the pitch. And I'll tell you why.
Hold on one second. Sorry. Off the pitch?
No. You've invited me on your programme. Let me tell you why. I was a social services director for 14 years. I've been a social worker for 52 years. And during that time, children have died that I have known. Children have died who my colleagues have known when I was a director of social services. People were doing the best with the information that they had and the time that they had. Now, one of the things that you need to face up to, is that in the last 14 years, children's social services in this country have been cut back year on year on year. Police have withdrawn from the community. We don't have community policing now because of cuts within policing. You know what's happening in terms of the health service and the difficulties of doing the job there. So the context in which people are trying to do a really difficult, challenging job, often without all the information that becomes available later on. If you want to take them all off the pitch, it's not going to be the solution.
Right. This is not personal, but it's going to become personal. Not against you. It's because I'm a father. And I'll tell you what I don't agree with what you've just said. I absolutely guarantee, and I knew and I understand, 14 years of Tory austerity, there are less social workers, there are less police. I rail against that every day. But do me a favour, Professor Ray Jones. If you want to sack people, they won't be on the pitch. Then the team's not good enough. Let me ask you. You said you did this 52 years. You said you were a director for 14 years. Are you ready for this? Neighbours, don't tell me about information afterwards. Neighbours heard gut-wrenching screams from the home and reported to social services for 2.5 years. Concerned teachers recorded seeing bruises on this poor little mite's body and told social services over 2.5 years. Police were called and social services, astonishingly, did nothing. Now, I know, and I mean this with my hand on my heart, that social services do an amazing amount of work, but you cannot in any way tell me that that is not the most awful incompetence. That's not based on not having information or hours. That is based on complete incompetence. And I'll go further. The people that didn't look into this girl's death have blood on their hands, Ray. 1,000,000%. 1,000,000%.
You know the story. You know the details of this story. You've been all over it, I guess. So you will know that this child was returned to her father's care through the courts. So whatever the courts were presented with at that time...
By social services. Services.
The courts are an adversarial process, if you understand it. So there will be a whole range of things. Look, you call me, you asked me to be on your programme.
I know, but that's pretty condescending to say if I understand it.
Let me finish.
Isn't it?
Mr. Carl, you asked me to be on your programme. Let me finish my sentence, if you would. So the people who had the information at the time from a range of sources took that decision. Now we know something absolutely awful, horrific has happened.
And you don't think that social services should have known about that?
And it's been happening for some time as well. So quite rightly and appropriately and necessarily, that story will be brought together in terms of putting together all the information that's available. Then you can make the judgment that you are jumping to at the moment.
I don't think it's a judgment.
All right,
okay.
There must have been a lack of care.
No.
There must have been a lack of...
Well, hold on a second. You're making... But hold on a second. This is the bit I don't understand. Forgive me. I'm not being rude. I'm trying to get to this. You've talked about 14 years of political failure. You've talked about not enough police. You've talked about the judges system. But you won't answer the simple question. If I rang you 5 times and told you as my social worker in the area that my next-door neighbour, there were heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching screams from a child, and then at some point later you'd investigated and you decided that wasn't happening, or you hadn't looked into it, would you be in front of me making the excuses you are now for your colleagues? I would be saying to you...
I will tell you, when you finish your rant, I will tell you what I would have done. I would have been out there trying to find out what was going on within that family. I would have been speaking to the neighbours, trying to build up that picture. I would have been contacting the police and trying to get the information from them. I would have been contacting the GP, the school. I would have been trying to build that picture. And if the picture is, as we now understand that it is and was, then clearly there are significant concerns about why action wasn't taken. But we have to allow that picture now to be built up in terms of what was known at the time, what was known at the time, and what people did with the information they had at the time.
Well, that's the point. So how, as a man with all your experience, and you've just said exactly what anybody would say, quite rightly, you'd have done the job. You must surmise by that there has been a gargantuan failure on social services in terms of how they dealt with this, yes or no?
Well, the point I've made several times, and maybe you're not listening to, by putting that information... I know, do you want to hear this?
Yeah.
By putting that information together in terms of what was known at the time, not what's known now, what was known at the time by different people, how well they shared that information, how well they built the picture up. When you have that information in front of you, make the judgment that you're now making and which you're jumping to.
Why you keep saying I'm jumping? Why can't you say social services in this area failed that young child who is dead, who was beaten to a pulp for 2.5 years by, actually, this isn't your bag, a man who shouldn't even have been in this bloody country but managed to do what they usually do and allow that person to stay? That's another thing. But there were so many missed opportunities. So many neighbours rang, not you, but your colleagues, social services. So the police, school teachers, you're talking about building a picture. What bloody bigger picture did these people need to save this girl's life? Come on, that's not unreasonable, Ray.
What is unreasonable is jumping to the judgment and the conclusion and the actions that you want taken at this point in time. When you don't have the full story, I don't have the full story needs to be pulled together. I totally agree with you. This is absolutely horrific. But if the response is, let's sack the people who were involved, let's get them, as I say, off the pitch, then what we're going to do is create a situation where no one's going to come into this service, no one's going to come into this job. I'm talking about police officers here, I'm talking about paediatricians, I'm talking about health visitors, I'm talking about social workers. People are going to be told you're fired just because something terrible happened and you didn't stop it. When you didn't have
that's
all
like
the
any
information
job.
at
Forget
that
the
point
news.
in
I'm going to
time.
carry on. Sorry, but that's the... Forget the news. Go and get the bosses. I don't care. So how does that work? You're saying to me...
How it works is because you don't have the full story at the moment. I don't have the full story.
But those social workers were told by neighbours that this child was screaming.
You have bits of the story at the moment. Pull the story together. Find out what was known to the police, what was known to social workers at the time, how they made the judgments they made, what was said in terms of from the schools. I totally agree with you. That if you look at it as it is at the moment, this is absolutely awful and outrageous. I totally agree with you.
Thank you for coming on the show, Ray. Don't think me rude. I've got to move.
What I'm holding back on is making that judgment that you've already jumped to. Make that judgment when you have the full picture, because I don't have it at the moment. And
we'll agree to disagree, Ray Jones. Thank you. Welcome back. Thank you to Professor Ray Jones, former Director of Social Services for Wiltshire. It must be me. I must live in a different world and a parallel universe. It took him 8 minutes to say that was horrific. He said that I was jumping to conclusions. As a society, surely we are able to expect that the vulnerable and the young are protected. Listen, of course it's not... Of course you can talk about government cutbacks, talk about the police. The fact of the matter is, social services in Surrey were informed about this poor girl, heart-wrenching screams in agony, neighbours, police, the school, everybody, and still he wouldn't say social services have failed. Can you imagine doing a job where you so patently failed in what you were set out to do or told to do, but you just got to wrap up? These people should be prosecuted. They've got blood on their hands. Andrew's in Burnley. Good evening. How are you?
How you doing, Jeremy?
I'm angry now. Angry.
Yeah, well, listen, I'm going to just bring a couple of different contexts to it. So, listen, there's no avoiding the fact that this situation was absolutely horrendous, and you're right, there needs to be consequences for the people involved, and that happens in any corporate. If you don't do a job, you get sacked. In this case, obviously, there's a lot more severity. What I would say, however, and I can talk credibly about this, my wife works in safeguarding for children.
Yeah.
And you know, obviously there's a lot of confidential topics, but what I can say is that service that she works in is in special measures because there's a lack of people joining those services. There's a lack of people to be able to deal with things. And actually, when you look at it, when you're having to make a choice of whether you do a first visit to a baby or go and visit a child that's potentially in danger, and again, use the word potentially because there's different people's perceptions of what's priority and not.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to take a balanced view in the fact that, one, yes, this situation was really bad, but there has to be an acknowledgement that the people who are trying to do the best are absolutely well under-resourced.
Completely.
And actually, to become qualified in that area, you've got to go through a 3 or 4 year degree, which is not easy.
I've always said, actually, in the past, genuinely, and you can check this out, not you, other people, I've always said that what happens with social services is when horrendous stories like this happen, they are slaughtered, absolutely slaughtered, and that is understandable. They don't get the credit for when they get their job right. I absolutely give you that. What I can't have is a former director of a trust or a unit of these people saying, actually, if you start sacking people for gross incompetence, there'll be nobody there. I get what you're saying. The money isn't there, the training isn't there, people don't want to do it. But it comes down to this, whether they're overworked or overstretched. Surely, please to God, you're telling me, and I'm sure your wife is an amazing person and works through it, but if you said to her, I've heard from neighbours about gut-wrenching screams. I've heard from the school she's covered in bruises. I've heard from the police that we've been called several times. That would resonate in your head, wouldn't it, Andrew? It doesn't take away from the fact... I get it. Mate, I completely get your point, and I'm glad you rang, but... we surely need... I mean, yes, we can argue about money, but surely we would expect even the most stretched department to have done something about this kid, no?
Absolutely, but, you know, as I said at the beginning of the call, there's no avoidance of how bad this situation is managed, but from what I see when my wife goes to work and then comes home from work, the sheer amount of volume of topics that come across the desk as a head of safeguarding is out of control.
Mate, I really appreciate the call, and I do, and I mean that, and give my wife your best. Thank you so much for coming on. Good angle. Craig's in York. Craig, you're on Talk Drive. What you got?
So I know somebody that is involved in social services, had a child, can't go into too much specifics, but over 50 bruises, and the judge deemed that the child would be fit enough to go back to the mother if the two children were taken away from the mother. So they were prepared to put the child that had the horrendous bruising on the body.
But you see, right, so listen, in that instance... Oh, my wire's fallen out. It's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? In the middle of a link. Don't go anywhere, pal. My thing's fallen out. I'll just do it anyway. I need to find it. Don't, just stay there. I'm coming. It's just live. I've done it to Kev O'Sullivan. It keeps coming out. Don't go anywhere, lovely Craig in York. Are you back? Can you hear me? Craig?
Yes, I'm here.
What I would say in that instance is, absolutely, we should criticise the judges. But the difference to me between that case and Sarah Sharif is I can't criticise. I cannot criticise the social workers in York because they've identified that and they've taken that child away. The judge, he needs dealing with. In Sarah Sharif's case, I cannot for the life of me, whether it's stretched resources, whether it's ideology, whether it's incompetence, whether it's... I don't know. But when you read the report of how many neighbours rang, how many police visits there were, how many bruises at school, and social services ignored it all, man. That's different, isn't it?
No, it's what you said. What I'm saying is the child was put back in the placement of the mother, and this didn't happen in York, by the way. The child with the bruises was put back in the placement of the mother, and the other two children were taken away. And the judge's response was, maybe the burden won't be so bad on the mother if the other two children were away. It then went back to an appeal, and only then, and this was an appeal with people with degrees and everything sitting around there, after the appeal, only then was the child taken away. And I said to this person, you've saved that child's life, because only then, that they were prepared to risk it, to put the child that had lots of bruises on the body, to put it back with the mother. And I feel on that kind of instance, if there's bruising and whatever, the child should be removed immediately.
Couldn't agree more, mate. Really appreciate your call. Sorry for the problem with me dropping my wire then, Craig in York. Maybe I've got it wrong, people. I'd love to hear from you. I just think that irrespective of financial constraints, irrespective of governments, irrespective of all that, we have to do our best. And I think, you know, that guy said to me, well, you know, the thing is about, you know, they're overworked. How can you miss what that kid went through? Outrage. Oh, it does my head in. 5 / 0344 499 1000. Listen, we're going to go to our next guest, who's a wonderful man. He will undoubtedly put this in far better ways than I have. James Price, former government special advisor. A very good afternoon to you.
Hello, sir. How are you?
Raging. You haven't got kids yet. I can't have this. I can't. There's so many parts to this story. We'll talk about the fact that he was allowed to stay here, that piece of filth, because of an EU law in a sec. But I've just had an ex-head of social services in Wiltshire say to me, well, if you sack people because, you know, of mistakes like this, there won't be a team left out there. This is about government cuts. This is about the judiciary. This is about the police. No, my friend, I don't know, you heard this earlier. Neighbours would hear gut-wrenching screams coming from the home, which was often followed by a woman shouting, reported many times. Concerned teachers recorded seeing bruises on poor little Sarah and made a report on several occasions to social services. The police visited, but astonishingly, a decision was made not to look into the family, which I'm afraid an hour ago led me to say something that's caused everybody to go, oh, my God, he's lost it. Are we now going to be looking at two-tier social work as well then, James Price? Are people too scared like they were in the Rotherham situation? It's frightening to me. Unbelievable.
I think your anger is very well placed, both at the previous guest you had on and at this, I mean, frankly, horrible scenario. I've been trying to reread some of the stuff that happened to this girl, and it's enough to, you know, turn you off your dinner for the next week until Christmas. And just some of the other cases, you know, this idea that she started wearing a hijab at one point going into school that covered most of her face, but bruises could still be seen by teachers. And when she said to a teacher that she'd fallen off roller skates or something, then told another friend that she'd fallen off her bike, and all these inconsistent stories, and then started wearing nappies again because she was soiling herself, and then was taken out of school, and her dad wrote a cursory note that said, oh, she's being homeschooled. I mean, that tiny part of it surely should be enough to set enough alarm bells ringing to have a proper investigation going on. Why was it not done? The idea that you can just blame cuts, budget cuts, that's all it was. You don't need any kind of budget at all if a teacher has seen a child start wearing a hijab that still doesn't cover up bruises and then start soiling herself and then is taken immediately out of school. That's not a budget issue. That's something much deeper. Why was this not investigated at that point there? And as you say, Jeremy, you know, we've seen enough horrible examples of just the most awful things that we've been turning blind eyes to for a long time happen. Because why? Because we're too scared to investigate. Maybe there's a deeper cultural practice or something going on here. You mentioned Rotherham. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that happens.
I've got Maggie Oliver, the amazing Maggie Oliver, who's on in half an hour, who resigned from the police in Manchester because she was so appalled by what happened in Rotherham and has been an advocate. And you know, you have to ask the question, did it take 8 years? And the police have finally said, yeah, we were worried about stirring up trouble. That is not... But mate, to me, I'm going to end up imploding on air one day. That is completely and utterly wrong. If you break the law, if you injure a child, if you kill... I don't care what colour you are, I don't care what religion you are. That's not... You don't have your liberty. And also, I wanted to pick your brains on two other things to do with this story. Ready for this? The father, who, I don't even want to say his name, Afan Sharif, convicted today, it was revealed that he was a serial abuser of vulnerable women, and a serial abuser of vulnerable women, and arranged a sham marriage to a Polish woman to remain in Britain, and had, ladies and gentlemen, ready for this? One of those lefty human rights lawyers that we all pay for to allow him to stay here. I'm going to go and live on an island somewhere. Oh, I am on an island. But I'm being serious. It's appalling, my friend. Appalling.
But it's one of these stories where so many of the examples of social decay and decline that you and I have sadly had to talk about far too often the last couple of years all comes into sharp relief. And for all those lefties who go, oh, these are just culture wars, you're stoking culture wars, I think these are getting more akin to real conflict, certainly, if not outright wars. It's not a culture war to say that some cultures are worse than others. And if there are those that maybe say it's okay to hit your daughter so many times with cricket bats and brand her on the behind, as happened in this case, and worse things still, you know, if that is allowed in any kind of way, and we're not talking about religion, we're not talking about race, I'm talking about culture here. Culture is very important to all this, and that in some cultures, like the culture that's been on this island for a long time, those things were seen as deeply unacceptable, and you'd have been hanged in most ages on this island if you'd have committed half of the atrocities that this man did to his own daughter. And I would say, probably at this point, rightly so. And yet we're so scared of talking about it. There was a bill that was discussed in Parliament this week to ban cousin marriage. Yep. We've never really needed to ban cousin marriage because it's been so rare on this island for so long. But you take some cultures, and not just the ones that you might immediately spring to mind, there are several where this is much more prevalent, and it causes great suffering and pain to the children that are born with horrible congenital health defects as a result of cousin marriage. You take somewhere like Bradford, you see a huge amount, it's something like 25% more child deaths caused by those sorts of issues than is the national average. That is a cultural problem, and it is acceptable and moral thing to say that that is a bad and worse culture, and we should at this point use the power of the state to stamp it out. And certainly when you see examples like this, that girl should have been taken away from that family as soon as possible and put into some kind of protective care, because we see the result when it doesn't happen.
Very quickly, two things. Am I wrong or right to say that the people from social services that I think have blood on their hands should be prosecuted? They should not just lose their jobs. I mean, if you did that in any other job, you'd be prosecuted, wouldn't you?
Well, you often don't tend to find that there is punishment for failure across too much of the public sector. When it happens in central government, it's the minister who gets fired, and everybody else gets kind of promoted out of those positions into better paying jobs in other departments. Half of me is with you and wants the book thrown at people that allowed this to happen in the kind of the righteous vengeance that is coming to some of these people. But I mean, the other half of me does say that we need to get to the bottom of why there are these failings, and not the kind of stupid inquiry that we're having with COVID at the moment. There's going to come to the same kind of, oh, Boris was an idiot conclusion that we all know is going to come to, but actually get into the root of it. And if people need to be made immune from prosecution so that they can tell the truth and so that they can say, look, this is where I made these mistakes, I was scared of being called X or Y, or I didn't do this when I should have done, then we get to the bottom of that. And if that's more likely to save the next little girl, then that's probably a better outcome.
The other question is the death penalty. Outraged people, many contacting this show in the last hour and a half saying bring it back. Do you, if you systematically beat, abuse and ultimately kill a 10-year-old girl, if you are a known abuser of vulnerable women and you've got a history, if you're in this country where you shouldn't be in this country, but more importantly, you have murdered a 10-year-old innocent child, do you deserve to live?
No, I'm afraid I've come around to the opinion that you don't. The state is about to have the power to assist in the suicide, let's talk this, to end the life, to help kill people in hospital who have become a burden. And of course, although that terrible assisted suicide bill has been very poorly drafted, it will be expanded in what it can do. In Canada, where it's happened, it's now the 5th most common cause of death in all of Canada, medically assisted dying, as they call it. If you're able to do that to poor granny who doesn't want to be a burden to her family anymore, surely we can do it for paedophiles and child rapists and things like that.
Couldn't agree more. 3 quick topics, your brilliance, please, on all of them. Angela Rayner says new prisons will be forced through the planning process under powers that allow the objections of local towns and villages to be overruled. Under laws introduced to tackle the prison overcrowding crisis, the Ministry of Justice will be able to bypass councils who normally decide on planning applications. I find myself in a slightly strange position here, and Mike Graham's on the way and might think I've lost the plot. All I hear about is people moaning about no houses and no prisons. And I'm not a fan of Angela Rayner, who was out of her depth, like, unbelievably when she was on Trevor Phillips. But she's right, isn't she? If we're going to do anything about this...
Politics is all about making these sorts of decisions, right? To govern is to choose. And whilst I wouldn't like the idea of prisons being built in lovely, kind, leafy parts of town that should be turned for lovely, beautiful houses or lovely nature reserves or something, we definitely need way more prison places, and we need to lock people up for a very long time, because most of the crimes are committed by people, same people again and again. You get 200, 300 convictions, short stay, you're let out again. These same rat bags go and commit the same kind of crimes. We need to have somewhere to put them in for a very long time. And if we're not getting that done at the moment, ramming it through the planning process, I mean, I'm kind of in favour of that. Ideally, you do it somewhere where the land is cheap, the land is not very nice for farming or for living, and these people can go and rot there for the crimes they do to the rest of society.
Completely again. I love your phrase of the day, rat bag. Finally, whenever I'm doing this show, I was talking about how I remembered 1979 under the last Labour government, how there was rubbish on the streets, green goddesses run by the army because there weren't ambulances, there weren't refuse collectors, there was nothing, and everybody went, oh! So they arrived, the Labour government. It was an £8 billion black hole. They decided the best way to deal with that was to give some of their union mates, to make themselves look good, another spend 11 billion basically, to double it to 22, to give the doctors and the junior doctors, all these people. And I remember thinking, the minute you cast that die, every single union, as in the late 70s, so today we hear the astonishing news. Shock, shock, shock. Angry trade union bosses have warned of fresh NHS and school strikes after ministers recommended a 2.8% pay rise for millions of public sector workers. The view from the cheap seats are much easier for Sir Keir and his government than actually being there. 2.8% is about on par with inflation. The reality... But in the end, this lot will go on strike and they'll have to up it and we'll all got more skint. This is pure socialism. It's exactly because they gave too high a thing to the people at the beginning, isn't it?
Yep, absolutely right. As the good book says, as the dog returneth to his vomit, so the fool returneth to his folly. This is exactly what got us into the kind of horrendous economic mess that precipitated the rise of Margaret Thatcher to come and sort out that mess and fix everything in the first place. Let's hope that whoever follows Starmer follows in short order and is able to understand that and is able to get us going again. We're not the rich country that so many people seem to think we are. We've had no real growth for a long time, certainly no productivity growth in the public sector that would justify these kinds of pay rises, and we just don't have the fiscal firepower to be spaffing away all this kind of money onto people for no good reason when the private sector is being taxed and individuals are being taxed more than they have been at any point since the Second World War, and the world's getting scarier and we're going to have to rearm a lot more than we are. We can't pay for all of these things. We should pay for smart things. We should get growth going again, and we shouldn't bow to union paymasters. But who is the Labour Party for? It ain't for the country, it's for the trade unions.
But that's the interesting point, and I've got to finish. If he's going to hack off the trade unionists, because the reality is I can only give you 2.8%, if he's going to hack off local Labour councils by saying I'm building my prisons, he's already hacked off all of business by crushing rates against, making it almost impossible. He's already upset the farmers by his land grab. He's already hacked off every single pensioner who's not going to be warm this winter, all in 20 weeks. What a complete and utter, I nearly said the wrong word. James Price, you're a legend. We love having you on. Thank you very much indeed. 5:21. We're going to go to an ad break with another voice now. Kate on social services, go.
Yeah, I've worked in prisons, I've worked with child killers, I've worked with a lot, and I've also worked with people who look after these children, and quite honestly, this shouts, what, am I going to be called a racist from these people? I mean, they should be doing a job, no matter how over-exhausted they are. They need to do a job and they need to look after children, and that's simple.
You find me having just partaken in a chocolate caterpillar, which I was excited about eating until Jodie told me halfway through it that it was in fact vegan. Tasted absolutely bloody awful. It actually didn't taste awful.
No, I mean, well, they're quite good at recreating the taste of things that are not vegan, but you have to wonder what's made of... How do you get chocolate which is not made with milk?
Oh,
what's
God,
it made with?
I'm going to be sick now.
What's it made with?
Oh, yes. I don't know.
I don't know.
Welcome, my friend.
Yeah.
Before we get on to a lot of other stuff, Sarah Sharif, this news broke while we were doing Plank of the Week, and I have literally just been in a 10-minute argument with a former head of social services who refused to point the finger at social services, despite the absolute truth that neighbours would hear gut-wrenching screams coming from the house.
Yeah.
that concerned teachers reported on several occasions seeing bruises. The police went to the house, and astonishingly, a decision was made by Surrey Social Services not to look into the family.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, how many times do we have to see the same pattern?
Victoria Columbia,
Victoria Columbia, Baby P. You know, it's always the same problem. You know, these social services, they don't really want to investigate things because they might be too horrible, or because there might be some racial aspect to it, or, you know, they don't want to be called racist. It's absolutely unbelievable.
So then, of course, I then get into the whole Rotherham thing. We've got Maggie Oliver on a bit, because to me, British male Pakistan is 8 years. I'm sorry. The police then admitted, didn't they? They were worried about racial tension. Are we now going to be talking, haven't talked about two-tier policing, we're going to have two-tier social work then, are we?
Yeah, I think we do, because I think the social workers will certainly investigate people that they think are not going to give them that problem, and they'll go and tick a few boxes and make sure that their targets are being hit, but they won't go after the people that are really causing harm and damage to children. I mean, you feel so awful for the poor little girl, don't you?
And we're
just
parents,
horrible.
aren't we, you and I, right?
Yeah.
And the thought, 70 injuries, 25 fractures. I can't...
No.
I literally...
You can't think about it.
And you might not want to answer this. It then leads on to a whole debate about, you know, the death penalty. Where are you on that?
Well, I heard what you said to James Price and what he said back to you, and I think you made a very good point. If we are now in a position as a state to sort of sanction assisted dying, then surely the next step might well be that you can have the death penalty. I mean,
I'm sort of black and white. My problem is because I'm a father and because I'm obsessed with all my children and I can't bear the thought of what this girl does.
Yeah.
If there is complete definitive proof, in my world, what he's done to that kid, he doesn't deserve to be at liberty in my society.
No.
I don't believe that.
And there's always a chance that he will be freed at some point, you know, no matter what happens, despite what the sentence is. And at the end of the day, it's going to cost a lot of money to keep him in prison. And that's another argument you can make to say, well, why don't we just do away with him? He certainly doesn't deserve to walk around.
No. Well, listen, there'll be lots going on in the next few days, and sentencing will be Tuesday, but when you've got the greatest radio presenter in the land in your building, Michael Graham, rumours that you will be knighted in the New Year's Honours list.
Oh, yeah. Well, me and Sadiq Khan, no, absolutely not. Can you imagine having to stand next to him and wait your turn?
Well, like my friend who got knighted, you might have to borrow my trousers. Afternoon, Graham.
I don't know if I'd get into your trousers.
So here's a great story, very quickly. My greatest friend, Graham, long story, but did great things and got knighted and arrived at my house to go to Windsor Castle 2 years ago. Came downstairs in his morning suit. He looked like a penguin. And I went, well, he said, well, I didn't realise you were... It's a bit... He ended up... My trousers, he wore... My trousers got knighted. That's as near as I will ever get to getting a knighthood.
Yeah. Not bad.
Knighted trousers. New prisons. Angela.
Yeah.
Again, I find myself slightly conflicted because I've sat and I've listened to all these people go, oh, we need to build houses and we need to build prisons. And I go, yeah, we bloody do.
Right.
And then you get all the local MPs going, not here.
Right.
Actually, I'm slightly conflicted because I think she's dreadful.
She is.
But actually, is she right?
Well, you definitely need more prisons, there's no question about that. But people who run prisons can't seem to agree with whether we need more prisons, because they say we're putting too many people in prison. And you go, well, hang on, well, how can we need more prisons if we're already putting too many people away in prison and we're letting them out too early? The prison system doesn't work, basically.
No.
And what they're
Are you
saying
one of those people who thinks that that lenient crime shouldn't be allowed in, or would you do, like, for knife crime with me, I double the sentence and not let them out?
I think you've got to hit people where it hurts at the beginning of their life of crime. Otherwise, they just continue to commit crime. I mean, if you don't lock people up for shoplifting, they're just going to keep shoplifting. You know, if you don't lock people up for jumping on a train and not paying, they just keep on doing it until eventually they hit some old lady over the head for the money she's got in her pocket. And I think you have to punish people.
You could, of course, get rid of the foreign criminals, couldn't you?
You could certainly make some space. 12,000 of them are here.
You can't do that because they didn't commit the crime in that country, apparently. That's the ECHR again.
That's ridiculous. That's absolute nonsense.
I nearly said the wrong word there.
Yeah, I know. I would put them on an island. I mean, there's plenty of islands up in the north of Scotland.
Or the Falkland Islands.
The Falkland Islands could also work. The Ascension Islands could also work. You know, any number of islands could work. I would lock people up in sort of, you know, just give them an island and make them build their own homes or something. You know, give them something to do. You know, just leave them
Make it unpleasant and cold.
Yeah.
And while we're at it, I'm sure the bosses will think I've finally lost a screw. I do a separate island for paedophiles, because I don't believe that all those people that have been looking at images of children should be allowed to be walking around.
No, of course they shouldn't. No, and we shouldn't not be locking people up because we haven't got any space.
No.
It's insane. It's ridiculous. In no other world would that happen.
By the way, just going back to that main story, Ufan Sharif, that piece of rubbish that murdered his daughter, was only allowed back. Do you know about this? This is brilliant. EU rules he exploited with the use of a human resources law paid for by the taxpayer to marry a Polish girl in a sham marriage to stay in our country.
Yes, because she would be a European citizen, therefore he would have access to staying here. I mean, it's absolutely mad. I don't know who makes these rules up. and makes it possible for
it's
people...
It's not actually, by the way, I'm absolving. It isn't actually Keir Starmer at this moment. This has been going on for bloody ages,
of course.
hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. Well, there's loads and loads of criminals who have been in this country for a long time who shouldn't be here. Loads of them. That guy Callaghan in Nottingham, he also came in on a student visa and didn't finish his course and just decided to stay anyway. I mean, unbelievable. He's another guy. I mean, I had the father of one of those poor victims on yesterday saying the father of the girl who was killed by Callaghan, who's obviously has got his life ruined now. But he was saying, you know, that he wants to now get answers from the NHS Trust in Nottingham because they were negligent in letting this guy out when they clearly knew that he was a danger to society. And he should never have been allowed out.
And yet again, another prime example in this country of let's look after or find an excuse for the perpetrator's crime and forget the bloody victim.
He deserves to have a second chance because he's a mad schizophrenic. He deserves to have a second chance, apparently. This was
what happens
before he did the killing.
But this is my whole capital punishment argument, right? What happens to real common sense, which is what this station's about, which says this person is essentially evil, and nothing that you can say or do is going to change the fact that they've murdered children or sliced people to death in broad daylight. This person doesn't deserve to be in our society. Why is that so difficult for people to swallow?
It really is strange to me. And you lock them up and you don't give them rehabilitation. You can't be rehabilitated from those kind of crimes. I'm sorry.
But I've been reassured by a friend of mine on the phone that, and I can't go too far into too much detail, but maybe 50 years inside for that man will be more hellish than being killed.
Well, perhaps so, but I would still say the cost of that to us is not worth it. I'd say just do away with him. Frankly.
I'm gonna. He wants to play a clip because you weren't. Are you able to hear?
I think so.
Right. This is the head of the social services in Wiltshire. Have a listen because I want your expertise on this. There we go.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that you need to face up to, is that in the last 14 years, children's social services in this country have been cut back year on year on year. Police have withdrawn from the community. We don't have community policing now because of cuts within policing. You know what's happening in terms of the health service and the difficulties of doing the job there. So the context in which people are trying to do a really difficult, challenging job, often without all the information that becomes available later on. If you want to take them off the pitch, it's not going to be the solution.
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable.
Not like these people got it wrong and a girl died.
Yeah. No.
Do they just justify each other's pathetic inability to do their job?
They do, because, of course, they sit around all day and they know where the dangerous children, the dangerous people are, where children are in danger, and it doesn't take a rocket scientist...
Because they manage to remove children who don't need to be removed. Have you noticed that one as well? There was a story about a guy who the child was removed because the dad had bathed an 8-year-old.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they can pick on people like that with absolute ease. I mean, I had this experience when I was up in Scotland when one of my kids was born, and we kept getting a visit from the health visitor, you know, who sort of kept knocking on the door and saying, is everything all right? And we're like, yeah, everything's fine, you know. And they just tick a box and they go...
Now, I've done this 6 times. This is a tip for people, and my wife always lets me do it, right?
Yeah.
So we come and have you don't need to, thanks. She was a nanny, it's number 5, see ya.
Yeah.
You don't want us to come? No, I don't want you to come. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes.
Go and stick your bleeding nose where it's needed.
But it depends on why they're there, you see, because they obviously earmark certain people and go, we're going to come and check these people out because they know it's not dangerous for them.
But not a man who's got a history of beating up vulnerable women and abusing children.
I know.
It's great, isn't it?
It is unbelievable.
Number 10 standing firm. More tractor and farmer revolts today. We had our friend Mike Cullen on, who's a beef farmer.
Yeah.
This is really interesting. Do you think number 10, a bit like the pensioners, you know, not having their money in the winter? Do you think they're going to stand firm, or do you think the farmers...
I think they are. I think because I don't think they understand that this is a massive problem. I don't think they get how big of a mistake they're making, and I think they genuinely believe, with all the zeal that they can muster, that this is how the country should be run. And they think that most people are actually in favour of them, because when they go and talk to Labour supporters in the middle of London or the middle of Manchester or the middle of Liverpool, they all go, oh yeah, they're really rich, you must tax them some more. They don't understand the countryside. They don't have any real affinity with it, and they genuinely think they're doing the right thing.
So this is a bit like, because for me it's a land grab, this is a bit like they don't realise that our farmers produce 55% of the stuff that we eat.
No.
It's a bit like GB Energy, because we don't know what that is. That's just a quest to do the green thing.
Isn't it?
So they're going to have to import oil and gas and food.
Yes.
And it's going to cost us even more.
And it's going to be even less green than they want it to be. It doesn't make any sense at all. But I think they're so stubborn and they're so sure of themselves, because it's the only explanation you can possibly have, that they won't change track because they don't think they need to.
Do you think that? Do you find yourself coming in? You come in early. I come in. Do you find yourself waking up sometimes and saying, I don't want to be angry every day, but the way it's going, it's impossible not to be?
Well, I'm not really angry anymore. I find it all rather ridiculous. I sometimes get angry, but I don't really.
You'd have to about that kid.
I don't wake up angry. I don't. I criticise them. I find them ludicrous. I find Keir Starmer to be one of the worst politicians I've ever come across in my life, which has been quite a long one. And I find them to be completely and utterly ridiculous. It's like a pantomime. It's like we're being run by idiots.
Somebody wrote to me and said that you and I should be in pantomime as the two ugly sisters.
Really?
And I felt like saying, it might be harsh, but we'll do anything for money.
We will.
To be honest.
Quite a lot of money, though.
Yeah, no, it's $250,000 each, and we'll certainly dress up. Here's something that is ridiculous, but needs highlighting. I don't know if you know this story. A London secondary school, where more than half of pupils are eligible for free school meals, have asked children to fast for Gaza this Friday. Staff and students at George Green School in Tower Hamlets have been told to come together in a collective fast on the 13th in support of the people of Palestine. A post on the school's website says, as a rights-respecting school, I don't know what that means, we stand united in supporting the children of Gaza, firmly advocating for their right to safety, health and education. It was founded in 1828 and it's launched a Just Giving page to raise funds for the crisis appeal and is asking everybody to not eat school lunch on Friday.
I mean, what an absolute and utter disgrace that is. Are they having a vigil for the hostages that are being held in Gaza? The innocent women and children who are still underground, being raped and tortured and killed by these scumbags from Hamas? Are they? No.
And that is a council, right? I just thought I'd finish with that. That's a council, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to impose on school children a religious or an ideological belief by saying, don't eat your lunch.
Right.
And yet a council in Surrey, not far away, can't even organise its social services to save a young child's life. That's what's wrong with this country. It is, isn't it? I mean, that...
Because the people running all this stuff are idiots. They're not, and they're worse than idiots, they're ideological idiots. Absolutely. I mean, what on earth is that going to do for Gaza?
And I bet you any money, if you and I had kids at that school and we objected, the kid would be ostracised.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely right. It's ludicrous, isn't it?
The world's gone mad.
Teach them the 3 R's, right?
What are the 3 R's?
The 3 R's, reading, writing and arithmetic.
I thought it was something else, but I'm going to tell you that off air.
That's another one.
Lovely. The legend that is Mike Graham, who works the longest hours of anybody I've ever worked with, is here tomorrow morning from 6 o'clock. Anything special on the show or just more?
No idea.
No.
More nonsense
That's
from the
what I love about it. By the way,
way,
don't fall for the BS that people say, well, I was produced. Somebody said to me the other day, I don't know, shouldn't you be in about 2 hours before your show? And I went, no.
Not necessarily.
No.
We did a big thing on parking today. You know, because there's a big move to make people who can't park very well have a sign on the car, which instead of an L, it would be a B, which means you're a bad parker. And a number of people that rang in to say they couldn't park, because my view was, look, if you can't park, you shouldn't be driving. If you don't know how to park a car...
My wife's not very good at parking, and one day, this is a true story, she came back to the car, which was not done very well, and there was a note saying, thanks for... I'm going to dribble, this is funny. Thanks for parking so close. Next time, why don't you leave an effing can opener? A-holes like you should take the bus.
That's not very nice.
And she wasn't very happy, but I thought it was hysterical.
Yeah. Well, you know what I also learned is that if you know some of these cars you can get now that are self-parking cars, right? I don't really understand how they do that.
That would frighten me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
But it's unnatural, right? But apparently they self-park and they can get you into a very tight space, but they don't get you out. So you're then stuck in there.
It's a bit like voting for Labour, isn't it?
Yeah. If you've got like an inch on either end...
There's a thought.
Yeah.
Now, I'm with you, and that's how weird our brains are, because I was about to say that self-parking thing. You can't sit there with the car swinging and whatever.
No, shocking.
Anyway, Michael Graham, the legend, is back with Morning Glory, up and at it, 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, only here on Talks 20 to 6. We're coming back in 3, but I definitely need a wee. See you in a bit.
Is Talk.
17 minutes to 6 o'clock. We're live across the United Kingdom. This is Talk Drive. Thank you very much, Steve, for tuning in. Don't forget, Mike Graham will be back tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. It's the only way to wake up across the UK. Common sense, free speech, and a man who knows exactly He's got the pulse of the British people, that is true. I've just been told, which is brilliant, because always they look at me through the glass. Why have you said that? Apparently, at this precise moment in time, the ability to put a phone call through isn't working. So engineering are having a brainstorming session, then they're going to have a meeting, and it'll be sorted out tomorrow afternoon. I'm joking, they'll sort it out. They're brilliant. Delighted to have my next guest on. Couldn't have picked a better person. A former detective constable in the Greater Manchester Police, and a whistleblower on the Rochdale grooming gang case, founder of the Maggie Oliver Foundation, a wonderful one. Maggie, welcome to Talk Drive. How are you?
Hi, Jeremy. I'm fine, thank you. Sad again about this horrendous case.
Been too long. I've so much to talk to you about. I've just had a sit-down row with a former director of social services in Wiltshire who blatantly refused to criticise colleagues. This is right. Told me that, didn't mention Sarah Sharif until 8 minutes in, but told me that 14 years of austerity under the Tories, the lack of police on the streets, the pressure on social workers to deliver targets was the reason. Not, it would seem, Maggie, what I read out earlier, which is that neighbours would hear gut-wrenching screams coming from the home, which was followed often by a woman screaming. Concerned teachers seeing bruises. She wore the outfit, and even then bruises were relevant. They'd made complaints. Police had made complaints. But astonishingly, Surrey Social Services decided not to look into the family. Can you put into words, unless it is just me, how completely and utterly abhorrent that is, and how, in my mind, maybe you disagree, these people are complicit in her death, aren't they?
I mean, if I could swear, Jeremy, I would swear, because this, again, is a catalogue of missed chances and missed opportunities. And this little girl suffered a life of violence and neglect. And from the day she was born, she was on the Child Protection Register. You know, the authorities were called 15 times, made aware. She was taken out of school. She was put in a hijab to hide her bruises. She was high risk, and we have a duty of care. And whilst I possibly would agree with a little bit of what that Director of Social Services has said, I would say that this is a problem that has existed for decades. When I joined the police, Jeremy, you know, I was horrified by children being failed by social services on a monumental scale. When I joined the police, I wanted to go into child protection. But the number of times that I would be horrified that a child was being left in a place that was unsafe, that was abusive, and being told that the social services were working with the family. Now, I would admit, or I would agree, that things have got worse because of, you know, a lack of training, unmanageable workloads. But the thing is, these things should not happen. We have repeated serious case reviews into these cases, but anybody with an ounce of common sense could look at this and see the risks there. You know, time after time, this little girl had human bite marks. She had burns from cigarettes. She was burnt with an iron, head injuries. I think 25 broken bones. And her family, her father and her stepmother, took her out of school to homeschool her. Well, you know, there should be a system that checks up on children that are being homeschooled. They don't just suddenly disappear.
I completely, Maggie, I completely agree with you. And it almost, I have to say, listen, people say I have an opinion on everything. I really, it makes me sick to the stomach. And I mean, the whole thing makes me sick to the stomach. And I acknowledged earlier, there are many instances where social services do a great job and we don't hear that. But this is a complete and utter dereliction of their duty. There's no common sense in this. And then we go further and we find that the father of Fan Sharif, who I think should rot in hell for all eternity, exploited, this is my favourite bit, if there is one, exploited EU rules to stay in the UK by using a human rights lawyer paid by you and me and everybody else listening, i.e. taxpayers, married in a sham marriage a Polish girl so he could stay in this country. Seriously, Maggie, before I talk to you about the other one, because it's one of the big things, what does that say? What is wrong with us?
It says that we're, as a country, we are pushovers for people who are playing the system. And you know, Jeremy, because we've spoken before, but on the Rochdale case, that is the one I'm known about, although now in my charity, we help any survivor of sexual abuse, not just grooming gangs. But, you know, in that case, the main abusers who abused dozens, if not hundreds of children, they used human rights legislation to avoid deportation by having the nerve to say that they were entitled to a family life. Well, I'm sorry, when you behave in that way that is inhumane, that you destroy dozens of children's lives, your own rights, for me, go out of the window. And if you want to share your life with your family, take your family back to where you should be. We shouldn't be giving them a home and supporting them. This guy...
£500,000 house in Woking, Surrey.
Who has got that?
The father. They lived in a £500,000 house in Surrey in Woking.
Unbelievable.
I mean, completely unbelievable. And then I go further, and this is why you're the ideal person to speak to, because, and I haven't got into trouble for this, but a lot of people find this an astonishing statement. I'm utterly convinced that the whole reason it took 8 years for the Rotherham grooming gangs to be brought to justice was because of two-tier policing, because I suspect greatly, and I could be wrong, that the police were worried about... Or maybe they've admitted it, maybe they haven't, that they could create, you know, tension in certain communities if they're arrested. These were British Pakistani men. If you put the boot on the other foot, and these have been, you know, right-wing, bigoted, whatever, absolutely gone on a heartbeat. So then I look at this today, and then again in my head it goes, are we now looking at the beginnings in this country of two-tier social work? Was nothing done because this was... I don't know, but it does beg questions, Maggie, doesn't it?
I mean, there's a lot of questions. You know, we need systemic changes, in my opinion, in all our public services. And, you know, when I started to speak out, the fear of Islamophobia was rife. But for me, it is a very relevant part of the conversation. But for me, as a serving police officer, my duty was to protect children. And it didn't matter where they came from or where the abusers came from. The law says you can't rape a child who is 10 or 11. End of. And with this, the duty of care extends to every child. And this child was on the Child Protection Register from the day she was born. Where were the social workers with a bit of common sense, who had instincts, who looked at this little girl and thought she needs protecting? Her father had already been arrested for very violent offences. One of the siblings was also at risk. The children had disclosed to teachers, to professionals, that they were being violently abused. There should have been immediate action, and this little girl should still be alive. And the people who allowed this to happen should hang their heads in shame. And the Director of Social Services, who is saying, you know, there are reasons, and he's blaming lack of funding, that is not the full issue. People have responsibility, and they have a duty of care. They should look at this and err on the side of caution. I mean, what I would say, Jeremy, is that we're dealing with cases where children are ripped from the heart of a family on the most minor reasons. Something like this, it's as plain as the nose on your face that this little girl was at risk. There was no action, and it was too late to save her life. But let's have systemic change. Let's have proper scrutiny of where public services are failing, whether it's police, the courts, the prisons, or social services. They are our public services, and if they don't work, we are in a lot of trouble, which I fear we really are.
I have to tell you, you know this because we've spoken loads. You speak so much sense. I love the work that you do. I think it's such an important voice, and I thank you, Maggie, as ever. The Maggie Oliver Foundation, a fantastic one. Look it up online. That woman is... I mean, this is a lady who forsook her career by standing up for what she believed in. She cares about kids. Really great to have her on the show. Goodness, where's the time gone, Ryan? Need a wee. 0344 499 1000. Let's talk drive.
Talk.
4 minutes to 6, so much to get on the next hour. We're so delighted. Brendan O'Neill will be here. He's got a take. Richard Tice will be here as well, and more of your calls talking about that top story about that poor girl and many things more. Only here on the Hub of Common Sense of Free Speech. To Wiltshire on the phone lines. Jane, you're on Talk Drive. What you got?
I am raging.
So am I, mate.
Who are people? Who are they? I mean, Who needs a degree to be a social worker, Jeremy?
Are you raging about the man who used to? Are you raging about the man who was on, who used to work for, be the boss of Wiltshire Social Services? He said to me, "You've got to blame the government cuts, and you've got to blame, you know, this, that, and the other." And I'm going, mate, you've got to blame the fact that a child died and people have blood on their hands because they didn't do their job properly.
Absolutely. When are people going to take responsibility for their actions?
Yeah.
And I mean, many years ago, I tried to become a social worker, and I lasted 6 months on the course because they put me on a placement with a 21-year-old social worker who was complaining that Daddy had bought her a brand new Golf for her birthday but hadn't taken out the insurance. We then went into a block of flats on Ladywell Estate in Salford, where I lived. And she asked the woman there, who had no money to feed her 3 kids, well, why don't you put it on your credit card? And me and this woman looked at each other, and I'm like, and these are the people you've got as social workers?
I think what that guy
Why
was...
are they not employing people like...
Because what they'll say is, Jane, what he said, Ray Jones, was this, you know, there's not enough, there's no money, so we can't train, people don't want to be in it. I get all that. I absolutely get that. But when neighbours who have heard gut-wrenching screams contact social services many times, when the school can see bruises despite what she's dressed in, when she's taken out of school, when there's reports from the police, you are so spot on with what you just said. That is complete and utter sheer incompetence on an industrial level. Today we heard that there will be prosecutions against a load of people about the post office scandal. I don't know who that could be. That could be politicians. It could be anybody. About bloody time. I do not understand how anybody can disagree with the fact that the social workers who have messed up here deserve to be prosecuted. They've caused it. I'm sorry. It's a fact.
Isn't there a corporate manslaughter charge for these people then?
And have you heard the news that he was only allowed in this country because he married a Polish girl and used a human rights law to exploit the EU laws? He should have been deported, but he got round it.
But the problem you've got is we're too woke. And this is why I love Maggie, because she wasn't afraid of that.
No.
This is culturally acceptable to these people.
Yeah. But I'll tell you something, in our little old world of talk, we're going to keep fighting back, aren't we, mate, eh?
Oh, I hope so. And employ social workers that can do the job. People like me that brought 3 kids up on their own on a council estate in Salford, that if you don't open the door, that's fine, but I'm not going away.
I love you. Where are you from in Wiltshire, love?
Stay here to Salford.
Good girl. Listen, I got to go. Don't think me bad. Respect you and thank you so much for your call. Excellent. Jane in Wiltshire. I'd say the voice of the people. In the next hour, as I promised you, Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer at Spiked, and Richard Tyson, Talk Drive 0344 499 1000, text to 87222. We will head to the news at 6 and more after this on Talk. Welcome back, hour 3 of Wednesday's Drive here on Common Sense and Free Speech Station Talk. Thank you for tuning in. We've been talking so many things today, but predominantly that appalling story, the murder of 10-year-old, sorry, Sarah Sharif. Today her father, Ufan Sharif, and stepmother Banish Batul found guilty, convicted of her murder at the Old Bailey, and they will be sentenced on Tuesday. When we dug into this story, it seems that this man should never have been in this country. He exploited EU rules, used a human rights lawyer, married a Polish girl in a scam and stayed here. And if that wasn't bad enough, despite 2.5 years of, I don't know, social services being run by neighbours who heard blood-curdling screams, by schools who could see bruises, by police who'd been to visit, they did absolutely nothing. And this poor girl died. And I don't mean to upset anybody. I can't, it's too much. 70 bruises, 25 fractured bones, burnt by an iron and cigarettes. And it started a huge discussion about what should happen to these people. And we got on to capital punishment and everything. Love your thoughts on that or anything else. 0344 499 1000, the phone lines in London. Stephen, you're on Talk Drive. What you got, pal?
Jeremy, nice to speak to you. So, look, I'm going to be honest with you. I'm an ex-convict, okay?
Yep.
So I'm lucky enough I'm one of them that turned my life around, and now I employ ex-convicts. So I managed to help myself out.
Good boy.
So, just to tell you, these people, I don't want them to be hung or electrocuted. I want them to suffer torture. Now, that's going to happen, Jez, is there, believe it or not, is a hierarchy on the sex offenders wing, okay? They call it Rule 43, where they put all the sex offenders, the rapists, the paedophiles, the general abusive to lesser beings than themselves, you know. They will be at the bottom of that rung. Do you understand?
Yeah, listen, we have to... You'll understand that I have to be careful when I'm broadcasting, and, you know, we have to be careful. Listen, one of the things that will sustain me when I go home tonight is the fact that I believe there's karma for everybody. The reason I got into the debate about the death penalty is sometimes you think to yourself, to do that to an innocent 10-year-old, right? To me, you lose the right to liberty. But it was already said to me, maybe being in prison for 50 years and suffering the appalling, being on your own, etc., without going into too much detail, maybe that's it. Steve, thank you. Let's go to Manchester. Gilly, you're on Talk Drive. What you got?
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to give my experience with social services. I was a carer of my niece and nephew for 6 years after my brother's marriage broke down terribly. And over that 6 years, their mother called social services and the police with various false allegations about me and my care. And over 6 years, I think I must have been visited over 6 times by the police and social services. And my point is that I understand why they needed to come and check. They had an allegation that something was going wrong with the children in my care, and they needed to do a welfare check on these children. But 2 points. Firstly, it was on their system that the mother had mental health issues and that all these allegations have been already looked into several times before and were false. And number 2 is if they came to check, and rightly so, that the kids in my care were okay, where was the checks for this poor little girl that suffered so much
Nowhere.
for so many years?
Nowhere. Breaks my heart, mate. And it does, I have to say, and I've been... it's not even bravery. I'm just going to have these discussions. That's, to me, is the point of the station. We've talked about the Rotherham grooming gangs. We've talked about how police have freely admitted that they didn't want to investigate British Pakistani men abusing, grooming, having whatever with 7 and 8-year-old girls, and it took a lot longer because they were worried about stirring up racial tension. I look at this story and I hear on the one hand that this guy has exploited EU rules to stay here. That's on the one hand. And then the other hand I think to myself, so are we going to have 2-tier social work now, like we've got 2-tier policing? I find the whole thing, for me, it's about a 10-year-old kid. He shouldn't have been in this country. But if you are telling me... Did you hear the head of Wiltshire Social Services an hour ago say to me, but if you take action against social workers for mistakes like this, there'll be nobody left. Well, they shouldn't be in the job in the first place. It's not about cuts, it's about common sense. The kid was being... Oh, it just breaks my heart. It's on television right now. I can't do it. Does my head in.
The whole thing is shocking. And what that guy from Wiltshire was saying was, so people that are trained to look out for the very things to protect children, well, we've got to let them off because there was cuts. But they were still in the job. And if they can't do the job because of cuts, then I actually don't want them in that job. They shouldn't be there. They should...
Completely agree. And another example about how seemingly we'll make every excuse for what turns out to be the perpetrator, but we won't do anything about the victims. Really good to have you on, Gilly. Thank you so much indeed for coming on the show. What is it, 8 minutes past 6, 0344 499 1000. We'll get as many on as we can between now and 7. Text to 87222. Start your message with the word talk. Oh, it's my favourite part of the week. 6 o'clock on a Wednesday, I feel like I'm feeling a similar voice. Brendan O'Neill, Chief Political Writer of Spiked. A very good evening, sir. How are you?
Hi, Jeremy. How you doing?
I'm good. I didn't mean to spend most of the show talking about Sarah Sharif, but I was rather galvanised, well, I say galvanised, the wrong word, by the ex-head of social services in Wiltshire, who said this is because of government cuts and, a lack of training. You shouldn't really be horrible to these people who didn't go round despite being warned for 2.5 years. Is it me, Brendan? Have I missed the point here, or do you feel the same? Because this is abhorrent to me, and I believe, these people have blood on their hands.
It's horrendous. And, this murder is down to Sarah Sharif's father and her stepmother, but it shames the whole country because this girl essentially died in public. She died in the public view. People heard her screaming. Social workers knew that she was being beaten and tortured. They went around, they looked into it, they didn't take sufficient action. School teachers knew that something was up. Lots of people knew that something was dreadfully wrong here and not insufficient action was taken. So this is on the father who behaved in such a barbaric way to his own daughter, but it's on us as a country as well. And we really have got to get our house in order, especially in relation to social workers who seem to be failing children too often these days.
Completely agree. And of course, I get it's difficult, but to me, it's about common sense. And then, of course, the rather unedifying news that this piece of, I don't even know the right way to describe, exploited EU rules to stay in the UK by employing a human rights lawyer, who we all paid for, the tax person, to go through the sham marriage to a Polish girl to stay here. Again, another example of how we seemingly will look after somebody who was a serial abuser of vulnerable women, and yet we don't care about a 10-year-old. How does that happen in my mind? I don't understand it. I genuinely don't.
Yeah, the fact that he was able to exploit the EU's Freedom of Movement Directive should really raise questions about directives like that. He was essentially aided and abetted by various wings of the state, including the European Union, the superstate, which has this directive which says that if someone from outside of Europe marries someone who's an EU citizen, then they can essentially live in anywhere in the EU that they want to. So there was very little that we could do to remove him from the UK because he married a Polish person. Therefore, he was allowed to stay because we were in the EU. Every rule seemed to benefit him rather than Sarah. Everything seemed to be, geared towards him getting a bit of an easy time and being able to build the life that he wanted rather than to the safety of that girl. And I think that's a time when society really needs to have a serious reckoning with itself.
Very personal, this next question. Don't have to answer it. Where are you on the death penalty for low lives like that?
I'm against the death penalty, but cases like this really test my opposition. They really do, because I don't see why we should have to pay to keep this man alive. But, I'm opposed to the death penalty on principle. I'm not comfortable with a state having power over life and death. And in fact,
well, they are now because of assisted dying.
Well, there you go. So I'm worried about assisted dying for that very reason. But I often also think it's a greater punishment to make these people rot in a cell for the rest of their lives rather than giving them the easy way out. So I'm very keen on the severest punishment we can inflict on these people. And for now, I think that is making sure they never see sunlight again.
Couldn't disagree with you in any way. Now, I'm slightly conflicted on the next story, and I've been looking forward to your response to this all day. Angela Rayner, who looked she looked like a fish out of water on Sunday on Sky News with Sir Trevor. She was unable to talk about Syria. She didn't even know where Syria was. She started getting on about prisons, and it was all a bit too much. But new prisons will be forced through the planning process, our Ange has announced today, under powers that will allow the objections of local towns and villages to be overruled. Under laws introduced to tackle the prison overcrowding crisis that we've got, the Ministry of Justice will be able to bypass councils who usually make the decisions on planning applications. Now, I am not a fan of this Labour government in any which way. Certainly not of her. And many, in fact, all of them. On the week that Sadiq, what's he called? Sir Sadiq Khan's going to get a knighthood. I mean, the whole thing leaves me cold. However, we have spent years and years in this country, Brendan, having a debate about more houses and talking about NIMBYs and talking about overcrowded prisons. And surely, actually, through gritted teeth, she's right, isn't she? We need to build prisons. And if that upsets a few people and takes up a few fields, sorry, but we need them, don't we?
Yeah, it's one of those difficult subjects, isn't it? Because, you can perfectly understand. There's probably no community in the whole country that actively wants a prison next door. There's not the kind of thing you want to see being built up the road. So I can understand why people might feel uncomfortable with that kind of institution. It's an unpleasant but necessary institution. No one wants to live next door to one. But at the same time, you're right. We do obviously need more prison space. I don't think we can allow NIMBYs, which is a pejorative term, but often quite appropriate. I don't think we can allow them to stand in the way of that. I just hope that the government, well, there are two things. Firstly, the government shouldn't be banging up people who've committed minor crimes, such as writing things on Facebook or tweeting an off-colour joke or whatever else might have happened over
But
the
maybe
past
they
few
should be jailing paedophiles who get suspended sentences. There's nothing at all that makes any sense in that at all, is there? Ever?
Absolutely not. There is a real problem with two-tier justice. Our justice system is broken and our prison system is overcrowded, and all of these problems need fixing, and they need fixing fast. I just hope that the government chooses where to put these places wisely. Put them where there aren't that many people, where there isn't a kind of small, cosy town with a generally elderly population. Don't put it in places like that. Be sensible about where they put them. I'm not sure we can trust the government to do that, but that should definitely be their guiding light.
I think the argument that they're going to make this happen in their mind is a good one, but we'll see. Let's bring it to another subject very much close to my heart. Hundreds more tractors grinding Westminster to a halt. There were demonstrations across the country, Suffolk and Norfolk. I've explained already about what this essentially means, this inheritance tax. It's blind Labour belief that anybody that's got anything is minted. Like, so it's the whole, let's put VAT on private schools. My parents spent 60% of their money and didn't go on holiday for 18 years to send my brother and I to school. That was their choice. I don't think that it's the Labour assumption, isn't it? Everybody goes to private schools minted, and everybody that's got a farm. Farmers take out between 1% and 2% of the value of their farm in wages, and so many have said if we're forced to pay this 20%, we'd have to sell and also pay 40% capital gains, and we'd be screwed. I believe it's nothing more than a cheap land grab so they can build their stupid wind farms and screw us all even more because they'll have to import it from abroad. You're with the farmers, aren't you? Because I am.
Oh, I'm completely with the farmers. I think what they're doing is incredibly important. I think they're taking a brave stand against a crazy government policy. And, you know, with the Labour government itself, I can't figure out whether they're doing what you've just described, which is a land grab, which I wouldn't put past them at all, for their stupid wind farms and other eco initiatives, or if they are just so clueless and so aloof and so cut off from ordinary people in ordinary life that they don't know how important farmers are. You know, there's another story in the news this week about how aristocratic Labour has become. It's a very much in club these days. A lot of middle-class people, a lot of Nepo babies, lots of people who've got sharp elbows and good connections. This is a new kind of government that is very, very removed from ordinary people, that doesn't understand what we do for a living, how our food is made, how things are transported. I think the more that we get these governments that live in a kind of technocratic otherworld, the more that they will just not understand the important things of life. It's
that for me,
now.
you're so right. I mean, here's the sheer magnitude of how stupid I think Labour are. So you're going to grab the land off farmers, who, by the way, make our food, 55% of it. So because you won't be able to make that food because you're taking our farmers' land away, we're going to have to import food. And we're already being screwed, farmers are, by supermarkets. So that's going to be even worse. But then even worse is we're going to do wind farms, which isn't going to provide enough electricity. So you'll have to import it despite all that we've got underneath. Drill, baby, drill. I think he's right. And so energy prices will go through the roof as well. It's just, as you said, it's almost as if there's no thought, no plan, no understanding of the very basic things of how this country works. I'm with you, really.
Yeah, I mean, they're a bunch of nutters, let's be honest about it. And this goes for governments across Europe, in fact. You know, the net zero policies are psychotic. So in the UK, for example, we've shut down virtually the entire coal industry. And so now we're getting our coal from overseas, you know, from South Africa or China or wherever, which firstly is produced in a less eco-friendly way than we might do it. And secondly, involves all that transportation. So, you know, these kinds of net zero policies, what they're basically all about is making us look good and eco-friendly with no regard for where our stuff comes from, where our energy comes from, where our food comes from. I just think that if you add together the net zero insanity with this inheritance tax and And with this government that seems to have such a demeaning view of older people and farming people and working people in general, what it adds up to is a government that is basically kicking working class people and farmers in the stomach, and it's really out of order.
Well, I'm going to say something that I meant to say 20 minutes ago, and I'm delighted to say it in front of you, Brendan O'Neill. It's 6:20 on the 11th of December, 2024, and at some point this afternoon, I think around 3 o'clock, maybe 2:30, Sarah Sharif's father and stepmother were found guilty of her murder in the most horrific way and will be sentenced on Tuesday. We have heard sweet FA from Yvette Cooper, from Mahmood, the Justice Secretary, not a word, people, in nearly 4 hours. Am I right in saying that, right? Absolutely nothing. I mean, that to me is... I don't even... I'm speechless, man. Nothing. We've had no comment from the government on one of the most horrific things I think I've ever heard. Nothing at all. But they'll be busy banging on saying you can't take your car into the office because, you know, you might... I don't know, whatever. Ridiculous. So that's an update. I want to finish with a story that should send all of the people at Spiked and you straight through the roof. Take a breath. A London secondary school, Brendan, where more than half of pupils are eligible for free school meals, has asked children to fast for Gaza on Friday. Staff and students at George Green's School in Tower Hamlets have been told to come together in a collective fast on December the 13th in support of the people of Palestine. A post on the school's website, we found out, said, as a rights-respecting school, we stand united in supporting the children of Gaza, firmly advocating for their right to be safe, have healthy and have an education. It's being run by UNICEF. So even if you don't agree with that, you're not allowed to eat on Friday. Yeah. Thought?
I think it's outrageous, actually. It's incredibly serious, you know, because when you encourage school kids to fast for Gaza, you're basically brainwashing them into having one particular view of this conflict and into, you know, buying into all the leftist ideology and all the anti-Israel sentiment. And, you know, I want to know, what are these people going to do for Jewish school kids in London, who, by the way, have at sometimes taken off their school blazers because they don't want to be targeted by anti-Semites.
Got a friend whose kids cannot wear their blazers on the bus or on the way to school in London. I've known her a long, long time, for fear of reprisal. I could not agree with you more. And when I come off air, I will be abused online by all the Palestinian supporters who say all I do is stick up for Jewish people. Extraordinary.
Yeah, and, you know, sticking up for Jewish people is such an important thing to do right now. I live fairly near the Jewish Free School in northwest London, and when I saw school kids around there without their blazers, and some of them were taking off their kippahs or putting baseball caps over them, what a shame, a shaming moment that was for this country. And the fact that there are other schools inculcating children into the pro-Gaza, anti-Israel worldview, that's going to make this situation even worse. It's going to worsen those social tensions and worsen life for Jewish kids in the capital. So this school, I think, needs to stop this initiative.
It's ideology, and it's not allowing children in any way to form their own opinions. And, of course, all the bedwetters will say, well, what's going on is appalling. I hate what I see in Gaza. I was also on air when that heinous, appalling crime took place on October the 7th, a year and a bit ago. And listen, I'll only say this. Israel's the only democratically elected state and government in that area. And I think, with what's happened in Syria, and I think with what Israel has done to Hezbollah and the Houthis and certainly Hamas, I think the mad Ayatollahs in Iran are going to have to rethink their strategy going forward. But I think you're right when you say that about Jewish school kids. And I think you're right when you say that we have to be very careful what we push on to children. Brendan, it's always an absolute pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us. The brilliant Brendan O'Neill, chief political writer at Spike, 623. He's changed, Richard Tice, ladies and gentlemen. He used to beg to come on. Now he's the Deputy Leader of Reform. Richard Tice has just informed us that he has to go and vote in the chamber. So we're going to go to another subject, but Richard Tice will be on the show ahead of 7 o'clock. Also, I'm led to believe, but he's probably so important he might have dumped me. See you in a bit.
Mobile, the home of common sense. This is Talk.
Thank you so much indeed for all of your involvement in the show this afternoon. So many people completely wound up by that main news story and many other things as well. Really appreciate your involvement. 0344 419 1000. Richard Tice is voting in the chamber. He'll be on a drive time ahead of 7 o'clock and ahead of Kev. Another really important news story today is that the government, again, I mean, perhaps this is another reason to salute the government. Puberty blockers for under 18s with gender dysphoria will be banned in the United Kingdom, the Department of Health and Social Care has announced. Following official advice from medical experts, existing emergency measures banning puberty blockers will be made indefinite, the government said. The Commission on Human Medicines published expert advice that there is currently an unacceptable safety risk in the continued prescription of puberty blockers. Thank God for that. And joining us from one of the best bodies ever, Sex Matters, the Director of Campaigns, Fiona McAnena, good afternoon. How are you?
Hello there, Jeremy.
This is great news, isn't it?
It's very good news. I think people need to understand that, you know, blocking the puberty of unhappy children was never a good idea. There was never good evidence for it. And sadly, parents and children have been told that this is what they need. And so it's quite courageous for government ministers to stand behind something that was put in place by the previous government. So what we've seen now is the Tories brought this in. Labour have maintained it. Well done to Wes Streeting. He was very clear in the House today. And he actually made special mention of the whistleblowers from the Tavistock Clinic, people who had called out the dangers of this treatment years ago and in some cases, you know, risked their jobs for it. So people who are wondering, well, this is a medical treatment, what's the big deal? Just think about it. This is basically saying to a little boy or a little girl, you can change sex and we'll give you treatment to stop your puberty from happening.
Can I ask you to explain to people from what age this had been happening? Because this, to me, again, is frightening. And I join you in saluting Wes Streeting. A second Cabinet Minister I'm saluting during the show, Angela Rayner, about prisons only, in brackets, close brackets. But Wes Streeting, absolutely correct. How young were kids getting these puberty blockers from doctors and from clinics?
Well, possibly as young as 8 in some cases. You see, the problem is, Jeremy, that children were being told that perhaps they were in the wrong body. And then in their primary school years, they were socially transitioning. So they were, and this is still happening, they were presenting as if they were the opposite sex. They were living in stealth as the opposite sex. And when puberty comes along, you can't pretend anymore. And so these poor, distressed children were being told that they should go to school pretending to be the other sex, and that if puberty were to start, that would be a disaster. So typically around 10 or 11 is when puberty starts. And so some of these children were given it even before. And the worst thing about it is we're told that it was time to think, that it was reversible. That is not true. The evidence we do have is that almost without exception, a child who is put on puberty blockers goes on to cross-sex hormones. They do not become the other sex. They become an infertile version of their own sex. It is not healthcare.
And how, just for people like me who are genuinely pleased, massively pleased this is done, how widespread was the prescription of puberty blockers? Because it sounds a dreadful thing to have allowed. How long has it been going on for? And how widespread was it?
Yeah, the record keeping at the Tavistock was very poor. It was one of the things that was criticised by the judges in a High Court case a couple of years ago, the Kirabel case. So we're not quite sure. It seems that there may have been a couple of thousand children in the UK put on these treatments. It accelerated very rapidly in the last 8 or 9 years. So way back in time, there used to be a handful of little boys every year who would get this treatment. And in recent years, there have been hundreds and hundreds, and it's switched to be 2/3 girls. You know, thankfully, those poor children who were misled into thinking this was good treatment, and their parents, thankfully, most of them will now be protected from that. But there are thousands of children getting this treatment in other countries. It's huge in Australia, it's huge in North America. And it's very damaging to children.
I mean, it's massively damaging. And what it does for me as well, this whole, you know, puberty blockers for under 18s with gender dysphoria, finally banned. But gender dysphoria, how is that defined? How does anybody have the right, with such a young child who doesn't know their brain, their sexuality, their body, almost every component of who the hell they are, who feels safe enough to make that decision? Who's qualified enough to make that decision?
Well, what does it even mean to have gender dysphoria?
Yeah.
You know, diagnostics seem to be that if you don't fit sex stereotypes, that maybe you're in the wrong body. And then the awful thing that's happening is children in primary school are being told that this is possible, and they're being given picture books that show them boys and girls deciding they're in the wrong body. Then the parents and the adults around them think that maybe that's the kind thing to do. Everyone plays along. There's been huge pressure on doctors, for example, to be what's called gender affirming, also on therapists. So if you take a confused child to a therapist these days, the therapist is afraid to challenge what that child is saying. So you get this insane situation where a child who, as you say, knows
Is
nothing,
a child.
Told.
Is a child. A child's not going to know its mind at 8 years of age. So in essence, what puberty blockers were, unless I'm missing the point, you always help me, is if we convince you or you somehow hear from somebody else that you might at some point want to change your sex, we'll give you them now and you can make a decision down the road.
Yes, but everyone around you is, first of all, they're telling you it's possible to change sex, but it's not. You cannot, as a child, understand what that's going to do to your body, which is, in some cases, quite horrific. And thirdly, what you don't know, and no one tells these poor children, is that the best cure for any kind of gender confusion is puberty. When they go through puberty, they'll realise what they are, and mostly that resolves any discomfort, and that's been blocked. So that's why all these children end up going on to cross-sex hormones. So it doesn't buy them time. It confirms this medical pathway that they're on, which is harmful.
I have to say, Macarena, Fiona, Sex Matters, I blow smoke quite rightly in the direction of your organisation every time. Thank you so much indeed. Fiona Macarena, Director of Campaigns at Sex Matters. What is it, 25 to 7 o'clock? And he's so important, he nowadays decides when he's coming on. Richard Tice, I am reliably informed. Every time I do this, though, Ryan, I go, we can't get him. Richard Tice will maybe be on after this break. Ta. Collins back, the Housewife's Choice. My wife will be delighted. 24 minutes to 7 o'clock. We're delighted to be joined now by Richard Tice, Deputy Leader of Reform and MP for Boston and Skegness. Richard, good afternoon.
Well, it's the afternoon, but I have to say, Jeremy, there's nothing good about what's going on in this utter madhouse.
Mate,
I tell you what, I've got to talk about this, Jeremy, because it's driven me bonkers. You can disagree with the Labour Party's policy on putting VAT on school fees, or you might think it's a good idea. Whether you agree or disagree, it would be quite a good idea to monitor how it's going after 6 months. The Labour Party are so utterly terrified that it's a disastrous idea. They don't want to be found out, so they've just voted against monitoring how it's going.
Sorry, I'd get that thing off the screen that says the Green Belt. Sorry, you've just come from the chamber and you're telling us fresh news, which is that although they are going to introduce 20% VAT rise on private schools, which is going to, by the way, so short-sighted because it believes that it means that everybody who goes there they presume is minted, which they're not, and also is going to force many private school kids to go back into a comprehensive system that's on its knees. They've just voted to say they're not going to see how it's going.
Correct. That's exactly what they've done, because they fear that the rest of us might actually be right. So in terms of, like, you know, transparency, checking how things are going, have we made the right decision, the wrong decision, are we spending taxpayers' cash wisely? No. This is a ideological, authoritarian bunch of hoods who do not want to be checked and monitored. It's utterly disgraceful. I'm sorry to get that rant over, but I'm quite cross about it.
Well, listen, I've loads to throw by you. How long have you got before you shoot off to some other high-powered interview?
I think that's done. I think my blood might burst if I have to go anywhere else and vote.
Well, not as much as mine, because I spent 10 minutes this afternoon with the ex-Director of Social Services in Wiltshire, who you'll have heard this appalling, abhorrent and disgusting story about Sarah Sharif, 10 years of old, her disgusting piece of crap of a father, Ufan Sharif, 42, and his stepmother, Banish Batul, have today been found guilty of a murder. They will indeed be convicted on Tuesday. Two things. He exploits EU rules with the help of a human resources lawyer paid for by the British taxpayer to stay in this country when we should have, you know, deported him. And secondly, Richard, and I don't want to ruin your evening, but it's just, I don't think I've ever seen response like this. When this girl neighbours would hear gut-wrenching screams coming from the home, which would be followed by more screams, and reported it on several occasions. Concerned teachers reported seeing bruises, and then she started wearing her beep, and then she was taken out of school. The police visited and complained, but astonishingly, social services in Surrey didn't look into this family. So I'm in front, whilst you're voting on that thing, I'm in front of the ex-director of social services in Wiltshire who says, if you start seeking retribution against staff after 14 years of Tory cuts and no training and very poor wages, there'll be nobody left. And I'm going, excuse me for not losing it, these people have blood on their hands, Richard Tice. These people have stood by, whether they're not... Where's the common sense in a 10-year-old child being... She had 25 fractures, Richard, when they found her. It's just, I can't do it, mate, as a father.
But this is, it is utterly tragic, and it's the dire consequences of a total lack of accountability, and saying that actually there has to be some sort of 360 look. How's it going? Are you performing? Have you got any concerns? And where people utterly screw up, actually, do you know what? Sometimes you've got to fire people.
Absolutely.
You've got to suspend people. Funny old world.
Well, not just
That's
even
how you
that.
make things happen better.
Not just that. Today we hear that the police are investigating many people about the post office scandal. I don't know whether that's politicians, for example. I don't know. But in my world, those social workers should be prosecuted if they have... I mean, can you imagine another part of society when you would know that a child... I don't know, a friend... I know that you're doing that and I don't report you. I'm complicit to that. I think it's... Listen, I think it's beyond horrific, and, you know, how many more? You know, Victoria Columbier, Baby
this is the point, Jeremy, is that I fear that what we keep hearing about is the tip of the iceberg. And we always, hear about this stuff after the case has been concluded, and this stuff takes years and years, and you just worry, well, who else has been let down by these people during this time frame, and how much of this was driven by sort of political correctness?
Well, so that was my next thing.
I fear that a bit like the grooming gangs, political correctness.
They are.
Was it someone from an ethnic minority, and therefore we can't talk about it?
Two-tier social working now. Two-tier social working. I said it at 4 o'clock.
Yeah, there you are. We live in a society of two-tierism. It's just it's shamefully shocking.
What's your take, Richard, and reforms, but yours, on the fact that this man was able to exploit EU rules to stay in the UK by gaining a taxpayer-funded human rights lawyer to stay here? What's your take on that?
Well, I mean, thank God we've left the EU for many, many reasons. But I think we've got to ask serious questions to these human rights lawyers who, in multiple different parts of our society, whether it's the illegal migrants, whether it's cases like this, they are actually partly complicit and responsible for these horrors. And I think they've got to look themselves very closely in the eye. And I'm not buying all this BS about, well, you've got to follow, we've got to be politically correct, and my job is to make sure that every technocracy of the law is followed. This stuff just drives me nuts because it's a total lack of common sense, and I think it's driving the British people mad. And bluntly, that's why reform is doing so well in the polls and going up, and people are saying we've got the momentum.
Mate, completely with you. One of the things that reform has been very supportive of, and this station and I personally massively so, more tractor demonstrations today in Westminster and other parts of the United Kingdom, Suffolk and Norfolk as well. And I was explaining to everybody earlier about how this, in my mind, we can get into the whole inheritance tax and how Labour don't seem to understand. You brought up schools. They don't seem to understand that farmers take between 1% and 2% of the value, and it's about custodians of land and passing it down. And they might be rich in assets, but certainly not in wages. And most of all, I think this is a land grab by Labour, which is going to result in them building bloody wind farms. But the irony of all of this, of course, Richard, is that the wind farms won't produce enough electricity, so we'll have to import that and pay more. And the 55% of the food that's grown in this country by farmers won't be grown, so we'll have to import that, so prices will go up. And one is led to believe that what you said at the beginning of this interview is correct. They don't know what they're doing.
Oh, well, I have more breaking news for you, Jeremy.
Oh, God.
Tomorrow will be some of the highest ever electricity prices in the United Kingdom in peacetime, because guess what? There's a Dunkelflaut across much of Europe. There's basically no wind, no sun, and therefore there's a crisis of a shortage of electricity. And the prices are off the dial. We've never seen anything like it. I mean, even at the sort of the peak of the Ukraine war, it's that sort of nuttery. And so I was at the tractor farmers protests earlier today. I mean, it was remarkable. It was tragic but incredible. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of tractors, the hooting, the honking, the waving, the shouting, the smiles. But let me just read you one slogan that was on the front of one tractor. R.I.P. Rookery Farms, April 1887 to April 2026, aged 139 years, cause of death, one Keir Starmer. 139-year-old family farm business that expect basically to suffer a potential death of that family business thanks to Keir Starmer and these loony Labour lot. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
And it's exactly what you said before, and I always use my parents with the private school thing. They decided that they wanted to send my brother and I to private school. They supplemented a huge amount of their income. We didn't go on holidays. They made sacrifices. That was their choice. This assumption that if you're a farmer or you send your children to private school that you're minted is so utterly Labour-esque. Their belief that anybody who has anything is entitled or doesn't need to work or can give away. And yet we see that report today that says so much of this Labour Party today is sort of aristocratic, and there's nepo babies everywhere, and they all live in Islington and they all drink the finest champagne, and they don't actually have any connection with the working classes that was actually essentially what the Labour Party was all about. However, Richard Tice, I find myself in a slightly difficult position because I'm going to see whether on two occasions today we're going to compliment the Labour Party. So take a breath, don't get too shocked. Angela Rayner's car crash interview with Sir Trevor Phillips was an utter disaster. She didn't know where Syria was. However, today, new prisoners will be forced through the planning process by Rayner under powers that allow objections of local towns and villages to be overruled. Under laws introduced to tackle the prison overcrowding crisis, the MOJ, the Ministry of Justice, will be able to bypass councils who normally decide on planning applications. So taking a breath, here's me thinking, we need more prisons, we need to send home the foreign criminals, but we need more prisons, and a bit like houses, all MPs go, yes, yes, and then they get home to their constituents, they go, no, 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 no. Is she right?
Well, we do need more prison spaces. That's absolutely correct. I've got a prison in my constituency. And look, I mean, fundamentally, we have to provide a proper deterrent. But there's no shortage of quite remote parts of the country, sometimes cold and slightly damp and inhospitable. There might be quite good locations for prisons. And I just think we have just got to get on with it, because if you haven't got enough prison spaces, then all of a sudden you find yourself letting out criminals who frankly should be serving a full sentence, not a 1/3 sentence, and therefore you've lost any sense of deterrent. And if you grow your population by 10 million, don't be surprised if you need a whole bunch more prison spaces, just on a pure pro rata basis. More people will sadly lead to more criminals.
You started by ranting about schools. I started by ranting about Sarah Sharif's parents. I'll leave you with this thought. You must tell Nige about this. A London secondary school where more than half of pupils are eligible for free school meals has asked children this Friday to fast for Gaza. Staff and students at the George Green School in Tower Hamlets have been called together in a collective fast in support of the people of Palestine. The website at school says, as a rights-respecting school, we stand united in supporting the children of Gaza, firmly advocating for their right to safety, health and education. Thoughts?
I don't think it's right to starve children. Point number one, children need to, bluntly, they need to eat and drink through the day to remain, well-fed, well-watered, so that they can learn, because that's what you go to school for. Point number two, I wonder during the day, if this does actually happen, how many children are going to have placards saying, release the hostages? Because I suspect actually that's probably the #1 way to stop all of the horrors going on in and around the Middle East. Release the hostages, and then people can actually get round a table and talk about the future. But if you don't release the hostages, don't be surprised if Israel wants to get the hostages back. You know, it's not rocket science. It really isn't.
It's common sense, which Reform is about, and we're about. Richard Tice as ever. Thank you, my friend. 10 to 7. Deputy Leader of Reform UK and MP for Boston and Skegness. Sorry, but here's how I think. Speaking common sense, which is what we're all about, isn't it? This is Talk Drive. Go back 7 minutes away from Kevin O'Sullivan's political asylum, followed by... Is it Petri Hoskins tonight from 10 o'clock? I think it is, my little people. My little people? What does that mean? 0344 499 1000. You've been calling in your droves. Let's go to Yorkshire. Steve, 1.5 minutes on Talk Drive. What you got?
It's just to reference the sad case of this young girl, 10-year-old.
Yes, mate.
But I had not similar, but I was close to similar. I lost my family in a house fire in 1970. Just turned 5. But I was put with the family by social services who absolutely treated me abysmally. I can't tell you on air what they did, but it was awful. Table leg, getting battered with that. Drinking urine, what they filled and drink it. It's 5-year-old. And then I always remember social services coming for me and the social worker crying on the street because of what they put me through. And then obviously I went to children's homes. But and it beggars belief, you know, how they end up with children and get away with it.
God, I really admire you, pal. You're basically going to say to me, and absolutely, let's pour compliments where they deserve to be poured. The social services in your situation got it absolutely spot on.
But they got it wrong, putting me with his family. Yeah. He was Asian, the usual suspect, and he was just bang out of order. But my thing with the social, why I'm not happy with them, Jez, I've been out of the country virtually 40 years, you know, serving the army, and I married a UN lady, not the usual rubbish in the UN, but she's doing a hard job. And during that time, I thought as I'm getting older, I've not got one memento, you know, any photograph, you know, from the fire.
Yeah.
And I've got nothing. And when I've contacted the social, they went, well, what do you want us to do? So as I get older, I'm just like raging with them. So yeah, that's it, Jeremy. You're just like, why bother?
Listen, isn't it telling your story of 5, such abuse, you escaped, and then you gave however many years to this country, and respect.
23.
No, mate. Listen, respect is in large supply to you, mate, and I really appreciate your call. Stephen Yorkshire, thank you. Final call of the day, Stockport. Darren, what you got, pal?
Yeah, evening, Jazz. I just want to work out, well, I can't work out in my own head. Now, this guy's got a history of violence.
Yeah.
And it's his daughter, and he's living with his new wife, which is the daughter's step. Where's the real mother? How did this daughter end up with the father in the first place? Surely she was placed.
I've no idea, maybe. No, she wasn't placed. It's his daughter. I've no idea. This was his 3rd marriage, I believe. Don't quote me on that. This was the 3rd marriage to this Banish Batul. He married a sham marriage to a Polish girl. He flouted European rules by getting one of those trendy left-wing lawyers to get him to stay here. But you're right. A serial abuser of vulnerable women. Where was the mother? To me, I don't know. Are you a father?
I'm a father and a grandfather of a girl, yeah. Daughter and a granddaughter.
I'll finish this show as I started it. I can't... It doesn't... I just can't... Well, no, well, I can, but I don't even... And it gets into a huge debate about what should happen to people, and I've listened to all sides of the argument today, and people have said, look, he'll rot in hell and he'll have a hard time in prison, and then other people have said, how much is that going to cost us? And others have said, like me initially, you know, does he deserve his liberty? I just... Apart from my heart going out to that kid, right, and part of my annoyance about how it was missed, and I had that discussion or argument with that social worker who said, you know, it's very difficult. Well, it's not common sense, you idiots, isn't it? That's what I think. But I also, do you know what I always think of in these situations, Daz? I've got a couple of friends, good friends, who have spent years trying to conceive and have children, and they can't. And they must just listen to stuff like this, and they must just think, I don't know. Listen, mate, really good to have you on. Stockport, great place. Spent loads of time there. A couple of minutes to 7 o'clock. The legend that is Kevin O'Sullivan, who, of course, will always be remembered as the man, as a TV critic, who used to write in his newspaper, Jeremy Vile. He's lived chuckling already in the background. Are you ever going to apologise for that?
I'm thinking about it. I'm working up to it. Give me another few months.
OK. On a serious note, mate, we've done the whole... We didn't mean to talk wholly about Sarah Sharif, but I think you didn't hear it. I had a social working... former boss of social workers in Wiltshire saying, it's government cutbacks and it's lack of training, it's lack of money, Jez. You need to be very careful before you judge these people. I think they've got blood on their hands and they should be prosecuted.
It goes like this. You know, what this guy did was he gamed the system. He knew he was in trouble. He married a Polish woman, which then gave him full residency rights in this country, unassailable. Well, that's what we need to look at. So people could still do this by having a sham marriage to a British woman, even though... because we left the EU, of course. And that shouldn't be automatic. We've got to look at these people.
Death penalty, where are you on that?
Bring it back for this guy, 100%. Do you know what I am on the death penalty? I'm neither here nor there. I'm not committed to banning it or having it, but I wouldn't mind if people like this were put to death, save us a few quid.
Only got 20 seconds. What are you starting with?
Well, that. Yeah. And later on, we'll finish the show. Will we get a White Christmas? There you go. What a programme.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much indeed for listening. It is the drive time night out. Jodie's going to get trolleyed. Thank you very much indeed. Amy, Muzzy, Jodie, Ryan, the legend that is Kevin O'Sullivan is next. We're going out to get absolutely smashed. Good night.